I'm Marcia McGinnis. I'm the president of NAMI Tri-Valley. NAMI stands for National Alliance on Mental Illness. We are and I'm facilitating the workshop today. And I do want to acknowledge that today's workshop is hosted by NAMI Tri-Valley, NAMI Alameda County, and the Allen Hu Foundation. So I'd like to introduce and thank each of our sponsors. Again, NAMI Tri-Valley, NAMI Alameda County, Allen Hu Foundation, Crisis Support Services of Alameda County, Veterans Affairs, Palo Alto Healthcare System, and Keep Hope Alive Collaborative. So before we begin, I'll start with housekeeping. Just so you know that the workshop is being recorded. It'll be posted on NAMI Tri-Valley's YouTube. And for those Zoom viewers, you won't be able to, I believe you will not be able to use your audio or video feature. Please ask all questions in the chat. And we do have informational handouts and other relevant information that we'll put in the chat box. So for those of you who are here in person today, the restrooms are down the hall and to your left. So there are two. If you need to step out, just take a break. It's a half day. We're more used to a full day. So this is a real, well, hopefully it'll feel a lot shorter, but full of incredible content. But we do encourage, if you need to take a break, please do. We even have our office available if you just need to, chill out for a little. So we'll have a brief 15-minute break, but I have to tell you, we've got lots and lots of food in the back. So help yourself at any time. If you're getting hungry and you need something, grab it. So don't wait for the break. If you're hungry now, if you're hungry in an hour, help yourself, please. Lastly, today's workshop is an informative educational forum, and we are not intended to diagnose or provide therapeutic services. So your input is very important to us. We're trying to write grants to keep funding this particular workshop. And so it's really important that you fill out your evaluation. This is really valuable data that is being asked of us when we apply. So thank you. So next, please check your agenda to follow the schedule. But before we do that, I'd like to do a little thank you moment. The workshop planning committee consisted of Mark Rahman, myself, Xiaofang Shen from Allen Hu Foundation, and a very special thank you to Quinn Yu, who has been my lifesaver here in helping out in many ways. So thank you to all of you. Oh, I forgot to mention Mark is with NAMI Alameda County and NAMI Tri-Valley. Did I get that right? Yeah. I want to thank all the volunteers who made today entirely possible. So Armine Matencian, Joyce Lombardo, NAMI Tri-Valley Publicity Committee. And if I've left anyone off, come see me later. But it's a pretty small group in here, so I think I got it covered. But just truly are grateful. So now we have the agenda. And we'll start out with Ari Davis on statistics, facts, followed by Judy Mathews, who will be speaking on brain function in adolescents. Cris Rita, who's been a regular coming back, and we are excited to see her as well. Suicide Prevention Theory and Practice. Lynn Gardner-Hackett. Her presentation is on YouTube and absolutely riveting. A Clarion Call, the Crisis in Black Teen and Young Adult Suicides. Brian Laurence will finish off with Self-Care for the Caregiver. So with that, I did want to make a few maybe personal comments. And let's say today's goals are to teach parents about the strengths they have to blunt the trajectory of suicide and provide skills to do so. There are no guarantees. However, empowering parents may help them to recognize signs and symptoms. I personally have several loved ones living with a serious mental illness and currently are adult, and they are at very high risk for suicide. Their lives with a psychiatric diagnosis began at early ages. One of my granddaughters was diagnosed with pediatric bipolar disorder at age 3. And she's now an adult with a diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder, bipolar type. One of my children showed early signs of schizophrenia at age 13. Both attempted suicide. So more than a decade ago, Mark Roman and I reasoned out that since families know their loved ones best, adding more knowledge, tools, and encouraging self-care were important skills. So we have provided the suicide prevention workshop for family caregivers 10 out of the past 11 years, and noticed that the suicide prevention information on kids and youth was very little, and not much time was devoted to it, and at least during that workshop. So we decided to pull that out of our regular annual workshop and focus only on children and teen suicide prevention. Consequently, every February, we will provide a workshop for parents of adolescents and children, and every August, we will provide a suicide prevention workshop for family caregivers that focuses on adults. I think the last thing I want to say on this piece, and I never talk 15 minutes, so we'll have time, Ari, to connect you up. Yeah. I just want to thank all of you for coming in today or on Zoom. Saturdays are kind of sacred for most of us, especially if we're working. And you're even more busy when you're retired. So there's another factor. And in our appreciation, I'm hoping that you walk away with a tool set that you can use, or that it opens a door for more information that you might want to know about. And you certainly may contact us at any time. We're here for you. There's no boundary on this. It's not confined to one little geographic area. This is a universal concern, and we just want to be able to carve a little piece out of it and slow down the suicides, if not prevent them. So with that, how are we on time? Okay, all right. So we're going to segue into our presenters. And I'd like to introduce to you our first speaker, which is Ari Davis, epidemiologist, Office of Violence Prevention, Alameda County Public Health Department. Ari works in the Alameda County Public Health Department's Office of Violence Prevention. He supports efforts to prevent youth suicide, gun violence, and domestic violence across the county through research and data analysis. He earned a Master's of Public Policy in 2018, is currently a doctor in public health, and a doctor in public health candidate. Okay, but I'd love to know more about what that means. And this is at the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health. So Ari first became passionate about gun violence prevention as a high school special ed teacher, working with students impacted by gun violence. So we're going to take a moment here to, unless you want me to pop it in from this side, it's up to you.
That's easy, yeah.
Okay. And
Whatever's easier. Happy to.
okay,
So,
oh, golly. So never mind all the emails. All right, there we go. So, all right. We'll put that here for now. And it just arrows, that
Great.
works. Okay, Ari.
Yeah. All right. I gotta just try to do both. Okay. Yeah, thank you so much for having me here today. And so yeah, so I'm from the public health department, and I'll provide an overview of the data on youth suicide in Alameda County. Sorry.
My apologies. We need to share screen,
Oh yeah.
which
Oh, I can.
which which one you want? Oh,
Yeah, I see.
That's good. All right. All right. So yeah, so I'm going to provide a brief overview of the data on youth suicide in Alameda County. So yeah, just briefly. So I work in the Office of Violence Prevention in the Public Health Department. So one of the areas that we work in is youth suicide prevention. And part of that is funded through a California Department of Health grant where they're really focused on the ages 0 to 25. So a lot of this data will be youth and then young adults as well. So that 0 to 25 age. And as part of that grant, we fund provide funding to various suicide prevention organizations across the county. And we are engaged in some system mapping to see, where there are potential gaps in suicide prevention services for youth. And then my role is really on the data side. So I can speak a little bit to those, the first two areas that we work in, but I'll provide context at the end to share with you all. So if you want to connect and learn more about our work. But yeah, my area is really looking at the data and trying to understand who's impacted by what types of violence. In this case, we're looking at suicide, and where and when and which groups are disproportionately impacted. And so that's what I'm talking about today. And so it's a lot of data, but obviously this is a really heavy subject, and each data point that I'm talking about is a life. So I just want to bring attention to that. But the idea is that, hopefully by looking at these population trends, we can identify interventions and enhance our prevention strategies. So today we'll talk about some data specific to Alameda County on suicidal ideation. We'll talk about populations at elevated risk, what self-harm injuries look like in terms of emergency room visits and hospitalizations in the county, and then we'll talk about suicide deaths. And then we'll also look at access to lethal means like firearms and the role that plays in youth suicide. So this is from a survey of high school youth it's a California survey, but this is specific to Alameda County. And so you can see there's many Alameda County youth report suicidal ideation. So the question they ask is, have you seriously considered suicide within the past year? And so you see that around 15 to 16% of high school students are reporting that they've seriously considered suicide. And then for non-traditional school, which is often students who were expelled from traditional schools or in the juvenile justice system, you can see that rate's even higher. And if you translate that to the overall population of youth in Alameda County, that's around 14,000 to 17,000 youth who every year have seriously considered, or reporting that they seriously considered suicide. Yeah, question?
Does zip code matter in this case?
So this survey is really across the county, so they don't have specific to this school, unfortunately. But I think it would. I think you might see some geographic variation. And you do see variation by different populations. So LGBT youth face a much higher level of suicidal ideation due to stigma and discrimination and the barriers they face. And so you can see that 45% of transgender high school youth are reporting that they are suicidal ideation. For lesbian, gay, and bisexual youth, it's 30%. And so you can see the differences. It's 5 times different between transgender and straight cisgender youth, and 3 times different between a lesbian, gay, and bisexual and straight and cisgender. So just illustrating that certain populations may need targeted support given the barriers and the discrimination they face. And so as we know, there's many risk factors, and I didn't include all the risk factors here, but that are associated with suicide risk. So we know mental illness, we know stigma, both stigma in terms of like we just talked about for different populations and identities, but also stigma of someone living with mental illness or who is suicidal and not being able to share that. And then exposure to trauma, economic hardship, and then involvement in criminal justice system is really increases the risk for suicide, and foster care involvement and housing instability. So when we think about the risk factors, there's definitely individual and family risk factors, but there's definitely also societal and community factors when we think about in the county. So when we think about the severity of suicide, so we just talked about how 14,000 to 17,000 high school students every year are reporting that they seriously consider suicide, but very few go on to have a serious injury, and then a smaller proportion end up dying by suicide. So you can see here that 95% of that population it ends up it does not end up in needing medical care or dying by suicide. And so that maybe is an indicator that many of our programs and supports in the county and the supports that we have in our communities are working to support that large pink part of the pyramid there. But it also shows how do we, when we're thinking about populations and vulnerable youth, like how do we identify those who are most at risk and then provide interventions to support that smaller proportion of the population. So if we focus on that top two little triangles at the top, that's the rest of this presentation will be focused on that. And so we have data on emergency room visits for self-harm, and hospitalizations for self-harm, and then data on suicides. And so you can see that around 900 folks are youth between the ages of 0 and 25 end up attempting suicide and needing medical care, right? And then a smaller portion, there's about 18 suicides of that age group each year in Alameda County. And so you could think, okay, 18, that doesn't sound like a large number, but that actually is a really large number for children and youth, because children and youth are usually healthy, and it's actually the 4th leading cause of death in Alameda County. And so, yeah, so it has an enormous burden on county. So looking at kind of the profile of non-fatal suicide attempts and self-harm in the county, females between the ages of 13 and 18 are the most have the highest risk, or having the highest proportion of ED visits and hospitalizations. And they make up 73% of those, females make up 73% of non-fatal firearm injuries. I'm sorry, non-fatal suicide attempts. And when we look at the methods used, tends to be inducing prescription drugs or cutting. Oh yeah, I see a question.
Would overdose considered even in this here as a cause?
So overdose would be considered, yeah. So as a cause, sorry.
Or suicide, right? Some people just, you don't know if it's substance use or suicide.
Yeah, so I think that that's a challenge in terms of determining.
Where did that go?
So if they can't determine intent, then it goes undetermined overdose, and so that usually is just seen as a as an overdose. But if they can determine intent, then it is.
It'll be interesting to
classified.
see the number of the death that's overdose, because that we know is a lot, and I bet you there's a percentage of that should be here that it isn't. And again, it's not, we're not here to prove it, just to understand that tip is a big thing underneath that we need to address.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also when you look at what drugs are, so actually for the hospitalization data, you can look and see what type of drugs are being used for that suicide attempt. And so in this case, it's a lot of prescription drugs, but very few opioid overdoses are classified as a self-harm. And maybe they should be. I'm not sure how that process goes. Yeah, that's a question.
Okay, I'm not sure, sorry, it's a weird question.
Yeah.
I'm not sure of the accuracy of, because I really believe it's much higher than your statistics say. So what I'm wondering is, how do you get the statistics? Where do they come from?
Oh yeah. So the death data is from death certificates from the state.
So it depends on the coroner's report.
Exactly. So this is based on the determinations, the investigation that the coroner does, and then the final report. So, and then in terms of the ED and hospitalization data, the hospitals send that to, and it's unfortunate they classify it as self-harm, and it's not necessarily a suicide attempt, but self-harm is, and then that code or that information is sent to the state, and then we are able to look at that data.
And that explains the lower, I know it's higher than that.
Yeah.
My daughter died of suicide, and that's not how it came up in the coroner's report. So, and she also did self-harm, and I'm not sure. I know that those. What?
I'm going to talk about that.
Okay, I mean, I just those. I don't need to. You have. It's interesting that your statistics are just from what is reported to the health department. And it's just an interesting fact.
Yeah.
I know it's higher than that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is definitely a limitation in the data. And there has been studies to look at like misclassification of unintentional injuries, what they call it, and they should be classified as suicide. So that definitely may play a role. Yeah, but this is based on the data that we have. And so maybe that's a push for more comprehensive data, or working with families and communities to get better data. Yep.
I know we're probably going to hear this later in another presentation, but it's hard to determine because youth, their brains are not developed, and I think
Yeah,
sometimes
we
they
talked about
watch.
that.
Yeah, they watch
Yeah.
something and they don't know that it's going to end their life.
Yeah, I'll be addressing.
Yeah. Okay. So
Great.
yeah, because that's hard to decipher when you're trying to get data, when you're trying to collect
Right.
data. It's
Yeah.
but I know it's having data is a really great start.
First step. Yeah.
It's
And
the
that's like
first
to
step.
start
Yeah.
the discussion. And yeah, so like the way that the hospitals collect it is just self-harm. They don't have it's not a suicide attempt, it's just self-harm. And then I guess the big takeaway here is that, there's a lot of research that those who attempt suicide are at increased risk for fatal suicide later. And so interventions are needed after an attempt. So looking at suicide deaths in the county, the risk really increases with age among those who are 0 to 25. So most deaths are occurring among males between the ages of 19 and 25. So males make up 63% of the deaths among the youth and young adult population. And that age 19 to 25 is again, 82% of all the suicides in children and youth, young adults. Black youth are disproportionately impacted. They account for around 9% of the population, but 9% of the youth population, but 27% of suicide deaths. And then if you look at the methods, they tend to be hanging, gunshot, and jumps from bridges and to trains as well. But you'll notice that there are very few prescription drug overdose suicides, that suicides deaths. So you can see the different profiles between injuries and the deaths. And so I think one takeaway for this that I'd be curious to get insights is that, as folks reach that kind of transition age, where they're transitioning out of high school, they're maybe leaving family, what kind of interventions are there to support that group? Because that seems to be the group that's dying, or the most at risk for dying by suicide. And like school-based interventions may not be reaching them. And so, yeah, when we looked back at the different profiles, we can see that, and I'm sure most folks are familiar with this, but this idea that limiting access to lethal means can reduce suicide. We know that attempts by inducing drugs or cutting have much less chance of being lethal because they can be stopped or interrupted mid-attempt. And there's a number of studies that kind of estimate between 1 and 8% of the time, or that the lethality is about 1 to 8%. But then when we're looking at more lethal methods, it's close to 75 to 90%. So when it's by firearm or hanging, it's almost always lethal. And I think there's a fair amount of research, especially among youth, that like the crisis, the time from when a youth decides that they are going to attempt a suicide, and when they take action, is actually sometimes short-lived and impulsive. And so if you can put time and space between someone who's in crisis and a firearm or another lethal means, you can save a life. And so, yeah, just focusing on that idea specific to firearm suicide. So we know that from like a fair amount of research across the country that firearm ownership triples the risk of suicide for household members in the house. And then we also know that youth who die by firearm suicide are most often getting it from a family member. And then often it's unsecured, or they know, maybe they actually know where it's hidden, or they know they have access to the code to unlock the safe. So there's clear strategies that I think are small steps that can help reduce that risk. First, just always locking firearms and ammunition, and then if there's someone who's potentially at risk for suicide or having challenges, storing that firearm outside of the home, like making sure that firearm's just not in the home when someone is even potentially at heightened risk. So kind of broad takeaways of this is that there's high levels of suicide ideation among youth in Alameda County. So we need to provide supports to that large group that's struggling. And then there's societal and community level factors that contribute to elevated risk among certain populations. When we're looking at non-fatal injuries, high school age females are at the highest risk. And then when we're looking at suicide deaths, it tends to be that transition age from high school into adulthood or into college. And among males, that tends to be the highest risk. And then limiting access to lethal means like firearms is a easy step that folks can take to help reduce risk.
Question.
Yep.
So what are community level factors? What would be an example?
Yeah, so I think, that's a good, well, so maybe that's, societal versus community. I mean, I was thinking like poverty within an area, maybe schools that are kind of don't have proper funding or under-resourced, lack of kind of community supports within maybe isolation and loneliness. So thinking kind of those things, which I guess kind of go between community and societal. Yeah. And then, any questions? And this is contact information. Please feel free to reach out. So NOAA is doing leading a lot of the suicide prevention work that we are doing and supporting with the contracting and funding of the different orgs that we provide some funding to. And then Kristen is the head of our Office of Violence Prevention, and so she's a great contact as well and is very much involved in this. So, yeah, we'd love to connect. And is there any questions about any of the data I showed? I know it's a fair amount of heavy stuff and in the weeds. Yep.
I really want to thank you.
Yeah.
For this into statistics. And I know they're wrong, but they're inaccurate, but it's also the inaccuracy is important information for us here too.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Where are you based out of? Is it Oakland?
So the health department's in San Leandro.
Somewhere?
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you
Yeah.
for coming.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment before I give my talk, that it's interesting that in the public health area, they talk about self-harm. And they mean, by self-harm, they mean, injured to yourself in some way. In the psychological community, self-harm is separated from suicidal ideation and behavior. And self-harm is not considered a suicidal behavior. So I'll talk about that more later, but it's lumped together there, which is really interesting because in psychology, they would not lump it together.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. And I think part of the reason we lump it is, and maybe that's like the discussions around how we get data, but we're kind of using it as a proxy, which is not a fair proxy, right? But it's all of that's lumped together by the hospitals because
That's the way they define it, but that's interesting to me because I didn't know that they were using the term self-harm.
Yeah.
And so that makes it very confusing for parents when their child is self-harming and they think that it's suicidal.
Yeah.
And it is not the same.
So
I'll talk about it
the
later.
way you address it is different as a parent.
I'll explain it to you.
Oh, I can't wait.
Nice. Great. Awesome.
I
Oh,
have a comment, yeah. Ari, thank you so much
Yeah.
for the data. I'm in the field of suicide prevention, and I want to say we are barely understanding it, and we need to all work together. And this type of data never really existed. And the fact that we are getting this information and it is being released to the public, it is the start. And I think the more that we work towards understanding suicide, we're going to get more and more answers, and the data is going to reflect it. So, but this is an excellent start, and I'm so proud, and thank you so much.
well, thank you.
I
Yeah.
loved your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks.
So our second speaker today is Judy Mathews, who's a retired child psychologist. She has a PhD from the University of Kansas in developmental and child psychology and an MPH from the University of Nebraska Medical Center. She began her career as a teacher of deaf-blind children and then worked for 35 years in various medical facilities in the US and Canada as a pediatric psychologist and associate professor of pediatrics. Since her retirement, she has volunteered closely with NAMI Alameda County and is currently on the board of directors. She volunteered closely with National Alliance on Mental Illness and is currently on the board of NAMI Alameda County. So
Thank you.
would you like me to run the slides or are you okay? Judy?
I could. What do you guys
Okay,
think?
so just the arrows.
Just the arrows. Okay,
Arrows
yeah,
forward.
okay,
Okay.
good, yeah. Yeah, thanks very much for having me here today, and hi to Joy, I see you there. I'm coming to you today both as a retired pediatric psychologist, but also as a parent. I have a 35-year-old son who was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder when he was 22. And so, and he had his first suicide attempt when he was 8. So I've seen it from both sides. And I'm very involved with NAMI. I've been involved with NAMI and they've since the beginning of his diagnosis. And I feel like NAMI saved my life and his together. So today I want to talk to you a little bit about adolescent development, maybe a lot about adolescent development. When I first adopted my son when he was 3, I pictured that, well, you know, I'm a child psychologist. I know how to raise a child, right? And so I envisioned that his adolescence would look like this. You know, he would be happy, he'd have lots of friends, he'd be in lots of activities, he'd be having in college on his way to a career and whatever. And I can tell you being a parent is very humbling. It's humbling for even people who are professionally supposed to know what they're doing. In reality, most parents don't see those kinds of adolescents. The ones who do are very, very lucky. But for the most part, we're kind of wondering why, you know, they didn't turn out like I thought they were going to turn out. Why are they showing off? Why are they on their screens all the time? Why are they isolating themselves in a corner or in their room? Why are they yelling and screaming and crying? Why are they, well, why do they have purple hair?
It's fashionable, that's why.
Yeah. Do you think I could get this so that's the whole screen here on this screen? No, but on here it's not.
If you look at the monitor,
Yeah, but I want to look at this.
You can click use slideshow.
You see? I'd like the whole screen.
I don't know how to do that.
Okay, never mind. I'm fine. I can see
I
it
don't
still. That's all right.
recognize this. Yeah.
No problem. No problem. Okay.
Slideshow. On the top left, use slideshow.
it
Use
is a
slideshow.
You mean it's not advancing?
Oh, no. It's fine.
It's
Just,
okay.
it's fine. Just leave it. That's fine. Fine. Okay. So, I just want to get this out of the way. That's all right. So why those things? Why are they not the way you expect them to be? Well, adolescence is a time of explosive changes. Explosive in, now it's not doing it. Here, let me see, there, okay, it's fine. So today I want to talk about the development of the adolescent brain, but I also want to talk about stages of adolescent development and what are the normal tasks that adolescents go through, and what makes them at risk for suicide, especially for suicide at that age. And a little bit about the impact of COVID, because COVID really did have an impact on children, and a bit about what we can do. But I won't be talking too much about prevention because that's your next talk. Okay, so adolescence can be divided into 3 stages, and they're really quite distinctive stages in terms of their development. Keep in mind that every adolescent, if you know one adolescent, you know one adolescent. Every adolescent is different. They develop differently at different rates, and girls tend to mature sooner than boys, but that's a general rule. So the early stage is between the ages of 10 and 13, and really is whenever puberty starts. So some children actually develop onset of puberty earlier than 10, some later. But that's the point at which their bodies are changing in ways that really affect everything about their lives. They tend to, at that early stage, they're still kind of thinking black and white, all or nothing, yes or no. And but they're beginning to feel that they need a little bit of privacy. And some kids at that age start to question their gender identity. In the middle adolescence, which is 14 to 17, this is the age. I should go back to this other one for a second and say that I think there is some worry that we're seeing more younger adolescents attempting suicide than used to be the case. And so this attention to this age group, 10 to 13, is really an important age for people to be studying. In reality, most of the data come from 14 or 13 to 25 5. So these younger kids are really at risk at more, I think, now than in the past. Middle adolescence is for categories generally as 14 to 17. And they're continuing their development of puberty. The boys' voices begin to crack, the girls' breasts develop, and they show an increased interest in sexuality and sexual relationships. They're more argumentative with parents. If any of you have adolescents, you know that. And they're moving towards more independence. They have more abstract thinking than those younger kids, but they're still not necessarily able to translate that into their behavior and what they do. They know what they should do, but they don't know, but they don't do it. And they have strong emotions, and they're more likely to take risks.
They know everything.
And they know everything, exactly. Yeah. And then late adolescence, for a long time, people thought adolescence was ended at 19 when they were no longer teenagers. But we know now that adolescence really extends until about 25 years of age. The brain is still developing. They're physically looking full grown. And so they can fool you into thinking they're adults. They can fool themselves into thinking they're adults, of course. And they have better impulse control than the younger kids. They're better able to weigh the risks and versus the benefits, and they're developing their individuality and their own values. And they're physically and emotionally separating from family. So I'm going to talk about 3 different areas of adolescent development. What's going on physically, what's going on behaviorally, and what's going on socially, because they're all interconnected. So let's talk about physical first. There's what's happening with the brain, what's happening with the hormones. So I had a friend with who was raising 7 adolescents at the same time. And one of the things he said to me was, adolescents' brains go to mush and only reemerge when they're 25. He had lots of experience knowing that. The part of the brain that's still not fully developed is the frontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is actually the furthest most to the left in this diagram of the blue area. And if you look at the function, it's called the executive functioning because it's the most, it determines really everything that we think and feel in one way or another. And it's responsible for all of these things that are listed here, for planning, problem solving, motivation, judgment, decision-making, impulse control, social behavior, personality, memory, learning, reward, and attention. Those are all still developing. They're not fully developed in an adolescent. And their sleep patterns are changing at this time. Their body clock changes so that it shifts forward 1 to 2 hours, which means that adolescents naturally, physiologically want to stay up later and sleep in later. And unfortunately, our schools have not followed that, have not listened to that biological fact. And so kids are having to get up early. They're staying up late, then they're getting up early, so they're often sleep deprived. And the other factor is that they're on their screens a lot of the time. And screens give out blue light, which tends to be a disturbance of sleep. If they use a phone or a TV right before sleep, it delays the onset of sleep. They're likely to have less sleep and poorer quality of sleep. So the other part of physical is raging hormones. And that is affects adolescents' moods. And the moods can change moment to moment, activity to activity, person to person. And so we can't always, as adults looking at an adolescent, understand why suddenly you start crying or suddenly start yelling or suddenly start whatever. Because the hormones are really as I said, raging. No better term than that. Excuse me, I have nasty cough. So what does that mean in terms of behavior? How does it manifest itself, these changes? Adolescents are less able to inhibit impulses. They're less able to weigh the consequences of decisions they make. They're less able to prioritize what's more important, less important. They're less able to strategize or plan ahead what they want to do. And they're more likely to be influenced by their peers, who are also not very good at making decisions. And they're, I think somebody said this earlier, I think you said this, they're right. They're right, and they are invulnerable. Nothing will happen to them. Socially, peers become more important than family. And social media becomes, in this day and age, is a really important thing to consider, because social media, they're inundated with social media influences. Social media can be harmful to adolescents because they're sensitive to social feedback. Their peers are becoming more important, and they're more vulnerable to what social media does for them, like they getting personalized feedback. You put something into the computer, and pretty soon you get something back, an advertisement for the shoes that you just looked at online. Adolescents are really influenced by the likes and followers, how many people like them or their comments, how many people are following them online. And the ad content is tailored specifically to youth. They feel a need to build their friendships. And so social media is a way to do that, particularly for youth who are socially inept. It's a way to distance themselves socially, at the same time coming close into somebody they don't know. So in other words, adolescents who are afraid to go out socially and make friends can make friends online without them seeing their pimples or whatever. They can become anonymous in some way online. And they're more susceptible to harmful content. So catfishing is a really good example of that. And of course, there are lots of other examples of malicious things that adults will do targeting youth. And one of the problems is that social media is not very good at being transparent about their guidelines. And of course, that's changing with changes in, I won't say it, administration. So why am I in your way? I'm sorry. So why can social media be harmful to teens? Again, this is along the same lines. They have underdeveloped impulse control. Remember, we talked about the brain. Impulse control is not so good, which means that it's hard for them to limit their time, and they'll stay on as long as you let them stay on. There are push notifications that capitalize on what they're sensitive to, and they are more likely to be distracted and be distractible. So they're more likely to click onto whatever it was that came on the screen there. And a lot of the youth's data on social media is not monitored and is taken without parental consent. And I mentioned earlier, they're vulnerable to malicious actors. So let's talk a little bit about what's normal adolescent development. I've talked about, the brain. Now I want to talk a little bit about what do adolescents have as the tasks before them that they need to develop. This is normal development. They're developing independence. It's normal for them to rebel against rules, to develop better independent living skills, to renegotiate their roles with parents. And sometimes parents are not willing to renegotiate those roles, so that can cause conflict. They're more interested in body image. They're one of their tasks is to manage sexual feelings and to understand the changes that are happening to them through puberty. Peer relationships are an important, really important part of adolescent development. And those friendships, I think it's interesting that when the kids are younger, they make friends based on the activities they're in. You know, if you're a gymnast, you make friends with the gymnasts. And if you're, you know, you like to play soccer, you play soccer with the kids, which is why for a lot of parents, getting adolescents involved in some kind of a group activity like that is a good way for them to make what could be healthy friendships. But now they're more interested in trust, shared ideas and feelings. That's how they choose their friends more. And they're developing their own identity. What are their own values? Not their parents' values, but their own values, which might be the same as their parents. What is their sexuality? What are their morals, and what do they consider to be justice?
And that's so generational, you know?
Yes, it
Like,
is.
I'm looking at this, I'm like, oh, thinks I'm an immigrant, what do I know?
Yeah, well, believe me, if you weren't an immigrant, he'd be saying the same thing to you.
Yeah, yeah.
I had a friend whose father told me that when she got back from college, she realized that her father had learned an awful lot in those 4 years. So they're wonderful, but they are developing wonderful new skills. And it's important with all these problems that we see that we recognize that they're learning to think for themselves. And they're better understanding other people's feelings. They know better how to problem solve things. And they're determining their own values and priorities, pursuing their own interests, developing mature relationships, and setting long-term life goals. So with all those changes going on, it's no wonder they sometimes make mistakes. And we have to expect that they're going to make mistakes. So let's spend the rest of this time talking about suicidal behavior in particular. Suicide really is not about death, it's about ending pain. I think that's really important to understand because it's not, even with young children who attempt suicide, often it's not that they want to die. It's they want to stop whatever it is that is making them experience pain. And if you think about the fact that their brain, they're not very good with impulse control, then they're at high risk for trying to end that pain in a way that could end their lives. I'm going to talk about just the definitions a little bit, and it was really interesting to hear Ari talk about self-harm. I will talk about that in the next slide, but in the psychiatric and psychological community, mental health field, the definitions are quite clear, and they're a bit different than in the public health field, it seems. Suicide is defined as actually causing your own death on purpose. Suicidal ideation, on the other hand, is you have thoughts of wanting to die, and suicidal behavior is focusing on doing things that cause your own death. So a person can think about wanting to die and not really have a plan. As a therapist, when you're asking about whether somebody is suicidal, you're asking them, are you thinking about dying? Do you want to die? Do you have a plan? And do you have a method? So the closer you get to having a plan and a method, the more urgent it is for intervention. So we talked a little, I mentioned earlier about self-harming. In my field, and actually my field is both public health and psychology, but in psychology, self-harming is not considered a suicidal behavior. Rarely do adolescents who self-harm say that they're trying to kill themselves or thinking about dying. It's really a stress release, and there are a lot of different causes and reasons for it, which I really can't get into here, but just know that 17% of all adolescents self-harm. And the most common way is by cutting themselves or burning themselves, sometimes pulling their hair out, sometimes hitting themselves or hitting objects with their heads. But the most common one you'll see is cutting. And the cutting is not for attention most of the time. Again, it depends upon the individual. It's individual kids do things differently, but often they will hide where they're cutting. So they'll do it under their arm and then wear a long sleeve shirt or on their inside their thigh so that nobody will know that they're cutting themselves. I will add that I think that one of the major reasons is that there's a adrenaline burst. When you cut yourself, you experience pain. And for some people who are really, really depressed, they are numbed. And it reminds them that they're still alive and they can feel.
Is piercing and tattoo considered self-harm?
What's that?
Tattoos or piercings?
Oh, well, that's a very good question because that's more complicated. Some people, I've thought about that too, whether I think probably for some kids it is that. But there's the peer pressure, social pressure added to that so that it can also be a peer acceptance kind of a thing, as opposed to truly self-harming. Not wanting, it's not for the pain, it's for the product. So COVID-19 really kind of affected all children and youth and adults pretty severely for those years. Overall, children and adolescents showed an increase in fear and anxiety during the COVID outbreak. And of course, there was a disruption in their daily routine, which would increase their fear and anxiety. But after the pandemic ended, those children showed a resilience if given the right support. And here is the only data I could find really on suicide specifically. Overall, during the pandemic, there was a 4 to 7% decrease in suicidal ideation amongst most adolescents. I think this is, okay, I guess it's all adolescents. And there was a decrease in adolescents who had a history of mental illness. But suicide attempts went up by 22% during the pandemic for youth who have some mental health problems. The suicidal behavior and attempts bounced back to pre-pandemic levels in 2022. So a little bit about this, who's at risk for this, and I think that Ari spoke to that very clearly and very well. Boys are at higher risk for, they're more likely to die from suicide than girls. Sorry, I can't see it here. Girls are more likely to attempt suicide than boys. LGBTQ plus youth are at higher risk, and guns are used in more than half of all suicide youths. Am I right about that? The guns? Tad lower, okay, okay. In teenagers, age 10 to 14, now we're breaking it down now. It's the second leading cause of death, which is really quite remarkable. And that's why I was saying that that's the age that we're seeing an increase in suicides.
What is the one? I can't really.
I think car accidents. Yeah. Yeah. 36% increase in African-American youth in suicidal, this is behavior, not completed suicides. And adolescent Black girls, compared with other demographics, have the highest increase in suicide attempts in that age group. Why are they at higher risk? Well, they're more likely to be impulsive. We talked about that first. They're not thinking before they're doing things, and they may think, I've just lost my boyfriend and this is the end of the world. You know, so they're less likely to think about the long-term consequences of their actions. So they oftentimes don't really think that they're going to die. That, I want to say, does not mean that you should ever underestimate someone's suicidal thoughts or attempts, and never think it's attention seeking. It might be attention seeking, but you can die just as easily from attention seeking as you can from a serious attempt at suicide. So you should not write it off and say, oh, they're just saying that because they want my attention, or they're mad at me. They have more difficulty in coming up with alternatives to whatever is causing them to consider suicide. Teens especially are at risk if there are changes in the family, changes in friendships, stress from social media, problems in school, or other kinds of losses. Death in the family is a really serious stressor to anybody. The youth who are at highest risk are ones with mental health problems, substance abuse problems, past suicide attempts, or stressful life events. Youth who have a family history of mental or substance abuse problems, a history of suicide or violence in the family. And I might add here, when Ari was talking about the community, in a low-income community, often there's more gang-related problems, which means that those youth have witnessed violence or suicide more frequently than someone from a upper class family. If they have easy access to guns or prescription medications, he mentioned that earlier, and imprisonment, they've been in the system, that puts them at higher risk. And this is what I was just saying, exposure to suicidal behavior of others. There have been some research into school intervention programs for adolescents in low-income communities to try and target youth who have actually witnessed violence or witnessed suicide, to try and help them to sort through what's going on and to help them adjust to life. I'm going to talk in a minute about contagion. This is a really important one to know about with adolescents, and then the social media we talked about before. There's something called contagion clusters. Contagion, if you think about a cold is contagious, like I am right now, make me cough, is that it's when the exposure to the suicide or suicidal behavior of one or more persons influences others to attempt suicide. And it can be personal exposure or it can be media exposure. 1% to 2% of teenage suicides are part of clusters. And as a therapist, it's really important to pay attention to that, because there are some kids who will attempt suicide who really are not in other circumstances likely to be suicidal, but they have friends. Just like the cutting is another one. Cutting is one where often there's a contagion element to it. And you'll have one friend shows another friend, shows another friend, shows another friend, and becomes part of being an in-group that you do that. So with social media, now it's an in-group that's online. So I am not going to focus too much on prevention, because I know we have a speaker going to speak specifically on that. But in general, this is in general, make sure that you get help for your child for any mental or substance abuse problems, and help your child understand that asking for help is not showing weakness. Many youth think that asking for help is a sign that there's something wrong with them and they're crazy or whatever. And it's really important to say, to make clear to your adolescent that this is a sign of strength. This is a sign of strength that you recognize. It's an adult behavior to recognize you need help. Listen to your child. Again, it's very hard when a kid is arguing with you and calling you names to listen to them. But if you listen to what they're saying, sometimes you can hear a little kernel of truth of something that maybe you need to think about yourself and address with them. And then show interest to them and stay connected. You know, when my son was an adolescent, there wasn't much that I could do that he wanted to do with me. If we played a game, he would undermine it. If I talked to him, he'd shut down. If I took him to an activity, he'd refuse to go. You know, so what I learned was I had to find something that he and I could do together that was not confrontational and didn't allow for confrontation. So we started just watching TV shows together. And that sounds like a very mundane thing to do. You're not talking or anything, but your attention, both of you, is on something other than the problem. And it opens the gate for talking about something besides all the things that they're doing wrong. And so to this day, he's 35 now. Every week we go to the movies together. And going to the movies together is a time to talk in the car before and after, stop and get something to eat. And it's our time of communicating with each other. So it stuck with us through the whole years and was a strategy I'm not sure I would have recommended as a psychologist before he was an adolescent. Yeah.
To me, that sounds like a safety plan, because the evidence suggests that when someone has a safety plan, that is one of the most powerful prevention tools for somebody. And
Yes.
so you have that discussion with your loved one, and it's like, this is what keeps me safe, this doesn't keep me safe, and then a family member supports it.
Yes.
And so it's lifelong.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's excellent. And safety plan, I'm sure that, you're not the one who's presenting?
No.
Oh, okay. Whoever's presenting, I'm sure we'll talk about safety plans. But safety plans are really important. Now, the problem with safety plan is if you have somebody who won't even talk to you, you can't make up a safety plan you can make up a safety plan by yourself. But to get your child to understand that, you have to have some way of talking with them. And sometimes it has to be a neutral person. It has to be a therapist. I worked with a lot of adolescents through the years, and so often they just would not open up to their parents because they were afraid of how their parents were going to react, because a lot of things they were saying were kind of shocking, you know, and no parent wants to hear this from their child. But when I worked with them, I always told them, I will hold your confidence. Whatever you tell me, I will not pass it on to your parents unless I think you're in danger. And in that case, I will talk to you about how we're going to present it to your parents, and we'll talk to them together. So that way they could open up to me about things. My mother is a bitch, you know. They could say that to me. They couldn't say that to their mother. So, and I already said this, talking to your child about suicide is not going to start them thinking about suicide or increase their chance of suicidal behavior. It's already in their heads. And talking about it gives them permission to talk to you about it and to open up about it. So don't ever be afraid to ask your child if they have thoughts of hurting themselves. And reassure them that you're not going to be judging them in any way. You just want them to be safe. You want to help them to be safe. And these, of course, are some of the things that Ari mentioned about keeping medicines and guns locked away and safe. If I have worked with a child who has suicidal ideation, not only do I have the parents take the guns to another location away from the home, but also knives. I've actually had one case where the ideation was to plow the car into a tree. So they had to take away the youth's driving privileges for a while. So it can take a lot of different forms. And sometimes they will not tell their parents that they're thinking about these things, which is the most difficult and painful thing for a parent to realize. And I feel for all of you who've had that experience, because you never feel your child is safe after that. Never. I still feel that. My son goes out, I'm thinking, is he going to come home? Still to this day. Yes, he does. Yeah. He's pretty disabled. And so he requires a lot of supervision, but he's working towards becoming more independent. He wants that for himself. He has been on clozapine for 13 years, and so he has no psychosis. It's just the long-term mental health effects. So WHO has a really nice model for adolescent well-being. And this is really, the public health field is really good at talking about how, looking at the big picture of adolescence. So in this graph, they're talking about the well-being, in the center is the well-being. Adolescents thrive and are able to achieve their full potential. That's what we want. So what are the spheres of influence? Good health, connectedness, positive values and contribution to society, safety and supportive environment, learning, competence, education, skills and employability, and agency and resilience. And you can see it's across all areas of their lives: family and peers, school and community, the wider society and local environment. And so if you think in terms of that, you're just one part of what the adolescent has to deal with in their lives. And you're a big part when they're younger. And as you get older, these things become more and more important and need to be looked at as a family member and as a society. So most of all, while setting limits, focus on the positives that you see in your adolescent and let them know you appreciate things they do right. And believe me, I know that's very hard to do when they're doing a lot of wrong things. But it's very important to notice those things. And sometimes you have to notice them in subtle ways. Like if I were to say to my son, you know, I really appreciate that you did the dishes. He'd be like that. But if I talked to my friend on the phone and said, you know, Anthony did the dishes today. Isn't that great? So he hears me say it, but I'm not saying it to him. And so it sinks in. So sometimes it has to be sort of secondhand for them to really realize that you are appreciating it and not to get confrontational. And remember that they are still learning and growing. And that brain is not fully developed till 25. And so they can behave like they look like an adult. They've got a beard. They're out there, you know, their girlfriend. They're, you know, planning their future. But their brain is still not fully developed. And then impulsivity is probably the hardest thing for them to learn to control over the years. Still hard for me, but, you know, so maybe I'm still an adolescent, I don't know. So, and of course, in crisis, you want to text or call 988, or you want to take them immediately to emergency room. You should never assume it is just attention-seeking behavior. And that's it. Then I gave you some resources. I'm sure you have lots of other resources back there, but these were based on my talk. These are some of the resources I used. And that's the end.
In fact, the
Any questions?
resources are in the folder, so.
Yeah.
we can print that up.
So any questions, comments?
Thank you. I really enjoy hearing that because I've got a granddaughter who's getting to that adolescent stage. And I said, oh, That's her right there.
Yeah. It's puzzling, isn't it? You know, suddenly they were such nice little kids.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a question about the contagion effect.
Yes.
So there, I know, like, I love the stats that you had. Do you believe it's because there is a lack of like having the conversation around suicide, like folks like checking in with the youth and just asking, hey, do you have plans of killing yourself? Like, just having that discussion among the youth population. Do you, like, what are your thoughts about the whole contagion, like, effect?
Well, I'm not quite sure what your question is around it, but the contagion really is adolescents talking to each other and seeing, not just talking, but seeing behavior. So, you know, when one adolescent actually takes their life, the other adolescents or their friends are, of course, greatly influenced by that, traumatized by it. And sometimes folklore will surround that. You know, they were brave, or they were, you know, they were you know, making a point or something like that. So in a way, the peers kind of perpetuate an incorrect interpretation of that. And so that kind of builds an idea that, well, maybe I could do that too. But I, again, don't ever think that that means that they're just attention seeking. It's just that now they're starting to think, well, maybe that is a solution.
Yeah, so there's a few pockets of communities that I see when I'm doing my work, that contagion is really
Yes.
really present. And other communities, they have different solutions to work with adolescents and reduce the suicides among the
Right,
youth.
right. Well, one thing that I used to do was I looked for clusters. When I had an adolescent who was suicidal, I asked about peers and, you know, to find out whether there was any way that others were being influenced. This was mostly when I was working with adolescents with cutting. Because that's where I saw it the most, was with cutting. And the literature says that the way to control that, or try to control that cluster, is to target the person who is the prime person that started it. Because they're the person who really is having the problems that their solution is to cut. And then they've shared it with other people. So if you can target that person who really started it, then you can target the cluster.
Great.
Yeah. Yeah.
If a person, child thinks that, well, they're going to go to heaven, you know, they'll die, they'll go to heaven, they'll still be around. I mean,
Well, yeah. I mean, of course, I mean,
does
there,
that include that, I mean, if they're talking about, well, when I get to heaven.
oh, I see what you're saying. Is that a, yeah, well, you know, it kind of makes sense that if somebody is thinking that way, then they're not going to be afraid of dying, right? Or they're looking forward to dying because they're thinking that it will relieve their pain. Yeah, could be a risk factor. Sure. Sure. You know, somebody who's highly spiritual. My son heard voices telling him to kill himself to save humanity. So 35. Yeah, and so, you know, there's an example of like a spiritual thing that he was believing that he was helping society in some way or helping humanity. And so it's such an individual thing. You can't generalize, but it makes a lot of sense that if somebody's very, very spiritual and they believe that they're going to a better place, that they're going to be less afraid of dying. Yeah.
even though we learn about a lot, like suicide should not be taken, or self-cutting or self-harm should not be considered as a attention-seeking behavior, but still many people think that it's attention-seeking. Do you know why?
Okay, so the question, I'm sorry, I didn't repeat the other questions. I just realized Mark had asked me to do that. The question was, what was the question? That whether,
People
why people, yeah, why people think of it as attention-seeking behavior. Well, honestly, sometimes the adolescents themselves frame it that way. You know, like I had a time when my son called me up. You hear that? Click, click, click. I had just told him no, he couldn't have the car. Hear that? Click, click, click. I'm playing Russian roulette. And you know, he was mad at me. He was mad at me because I wouldn't let him have the car. And he said, and if you call the police, I'm going to commit suicide by cop. And so there I am, you know. Yes, I knew that. I didn't know. I knew he had a gun, but I didn't know whether, I didn't know anything about Russian roulette. So he thought it was stupid that I thought he was really going to do that. But I called the police and alerted them, said, you know, he's saying he's going to commit suicide by cop. So when he came out of his apartment, 6 police officers with guns pointed at him. Yeah. And I will tell you, that was, he will tell you, that was probably the best thing I ever did in his life. They took his guns away and he was never able to get guns in Nebraska again. And he was actively suicidal later, but he did not have any guns.
I should mention we have gun laws in the back if anyone feels safe.
So, yeah, I don't know. I don't think they have, do they have the law in California that the guns are taken away if you,
Restraining orders.
yeah.
Yeah, so you can, I mean, family members, or you can work with law enforcement to file a gun restraining order if their loved one is a family member or, is at high risk for
And then they have no access, they can't buy a gun in California.
prohibited for a year, and then it can be extended.
Yeah, yeah.
And if someone goes in inpatient psych and receives care, then it's harder for them. There's like
Yeah.
a process too where their guns may be removed.
Yeah.
Speaker, which Cris Rita from Crisis Support Services, Alameda County. And I'll just I'll do the first paragraph. How's
Oh,
that?
that's, yeah, whatever you want. You've done enough.
Because
actually.
it's a wonderful bio. So Cris began working at Crisis Support Services of Alameda County in 2005 as a volunteer on the 24-hour crisis line. Cris has held several different positions during her time at Crisis Support Services, including Crisis Line Volunteer, Crisis Line Overnight Supervisor, and Crisis Line Trainer. She's taken over 11,000 calls, maybe more.
Yeah, actually about 17,000.
All right, I stand corrected, 17,000
Ben
calls.
just told me that the other day.
Oh, wow. In 2015, Cris joined the Community Education Department as a health educator for the Teens for Life program. So I do want to also mention that you are the Community Education Trainings Manager.
Yes, adult
Get that right?
trainings. Yes.
For adult trainings. So we are very privileged to have her come talk about youth suicide prevention for family, parents, and caregivers.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. You've had a great conference, it sounds like. I was listening in to your last speaker, and wow, that was great. I love that. I love talking about teenagers, especially talking about their brains, because I would watch my son as he was growing up, and I'd think, you look like an adult, but you sure don't think like an adult, right? You know, so it was good. And talking about contagion and suicide is a perfect lead in to what we're going to be talking about today. So just to kind of frame this for you, we're going to be talking about suicide, youth suicide specifically. A lot of what we talk about can also be applied to adults, but we're going to be really talking about youth and kids and what the difference is when they are thinking about suicide and what we should be looking for, because there are certain things that we should look for, warning signs about suicide. So this is a heavy topic. I do my best to make it light, and there's just no way to do that. So it's a heavy topic. So one of the things I like to do before we get started is have everyone, if you're not eating, of course, if you're eating, don't take a breath because you'll choke. But if you're available to do that, just take a couple of deep breaths. And just notice on your inhale where your body's at. Is there tension? And if there's tension, if you can blow it out when you exhale, that would be good. And I'm going to give you about 10 seconds to take just a couple breaths. And check in with yourself. Because this is a heavy conversation, I like to start with the self-care process, and breathing is one of the easiest ones to do no matter where you are. I was reminded of that this week, as a matter of fact, when I was at a doctor's appointment, and it was very tense in the doctor's office. And I was bringing the tension into the room. And so I took a couple of deep breaths, and I realized that really helps reduce my feelings at that point and calms me and regulates me. This presentation is geared towards parents and caregivers. You will probably hear some repeat information from your previous speakers, and that's okay. We don't mind a little repeating. It's always good to have those things repeated so that we get them completely. This is what we're going to do today. It's kind of for an hour, it's a lot, but if we need to, we'll skip some and we'll focus on other things. Please feel free to ask questions. I don't mind you interrupting and asking me a question, and letting me know, that you want to. If you're online, that's true too. I'll try and keep an eye on that and answer any questions that you might have. So we're going to start out with, we just did the introduction. What is suicide prevention? We'll talk about some youth statistics. Won't stay long on that. Talk a little bit about theory, what we know about suicide and what we don't. And here's the spoiler alert. We know a lot less about suicide than you would think. We actually know very, very little. And we'll talk about risk factors and warning signs. I'll touch on protective factors throughout the presentation. The biggest protective factor a child has is an adult, a parent, a caregiver, an aunt, an uncle, a grandmother that is there for them. We'll watch Kevin Hines' video, which some of you I'm sure have seen. We're also going to I'll teach you the steps of Be the One, which is a national program that has been put out by Lifeline before 988 actually, and Vibrant, which is a big suicide prevention organization. And we have a video from Offerman. What's his name? Steve Offerman, is that his first name? I can never remember his first name. Talking about Be the One. And then we'll talk about self-care. Okay. And I have some resources for you as well. If you'd like the slides, I'll send them to Marcia. You can also contact me directly and I'll send them to you directly if you'd like. So first of all, let me ask you a question. What is suicide prevention? What is it? Yeah.
Keeping somebody alive.
Keeping somebody alive. Absolutely. That's suicide prevention. We prevent them from taking their life. What else is suicide prevention? It's a good question, isn't it? Because when you think about it, yeah. Who's understanding who's at risk? Absolutely. Big part of suicide prevention is knowing who is at higher risk. Yeah. Anybody else? What is suicide prevention? This is an interesting question. I even looked it up on the internet, like define suicide prevention, and they gave me warning signs. There's no actual clear definition of what suicide prevention is. But when we think about suicide prevention, one of the things we know is that all of us play a role in it. That's part of it. that as a community, as individuals, we play a role in suicide prevention. But when we talk about suicide prevention, what most people think is it's calling a crisis line like 988 or our line 1-800-27, or well, that's the old one, 1-800-273-TALK, or our direct line in Alameda County. But suicide prevention is a great deal more than that. It's actually a lot of things we don't normally think about. Like when I think about suicide prevention, I think about the things that you think about. My crisis, working on my crisis line is mine. Keeping someone alive, doing those types of interventions, but it's food security. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You can't talk to someone about the higher level thinking if they're hungry, if they have no clothes, youth suicide prevention courses, doing this conference today is suicide prevention. Having affordable housing. If you're homeless, again, back to hierarchy of needs, right? If you don't have a home or you don't know where you're going to sleep, it's really hard to think about suicide or preventing it. Destigmatizing mental health. That's what many of us are all about here, is destigmatizing mental health. Community engagement activities, when we go out into the community. I think of that for our agency when we go to health fairs, when we go out to things that are happening in the community and we provide our resources. That's suicide prevention. Strengthening household financial security, increasing access to mental health care, parenting skills, teaching parents how to parent, because a lot of times parents don't know. When I first started in this field as a marriage and family therapist, I was working with kids that needed to be reunified through social services. And one of the big things was getting parents into parenting classes so they knew what to do. And then family acceptance, especially of LGBT plus kids. These are all suicide prevention. I bet you could think of 100 other things that could be suicide prevention. It's the whole of our community. We all work together to prevent suicide. And that's what suicide prevention is. It isn't just me on the crisis line or my agency on the crisis line. It's not just the therapist or the psychologist. It's all of us. It's you and me and everybody else working together to prevent suicide. So when we think about suicide prevention, what we want to do is broaden our scope of what we're thinking about. So I want you to keep that in mind today as we go through this presentation. And here are some key points about suicide prevention. We need to recognize and affirm that all and treat all individuals that have, going too fast, treat all individuals with inherent value and dignity, and recognize the importance of each person. We need to understand and change, and this is a shift, to change that suicide is not just the result of illness or an inner condition. Feelings of hopelessness that contribute to suicide can stem from a lot of different factors: social, economic, personal, all of those things combine to create the suicidal situation. So we want to again broaden our understanding that it's not just about illness or mental illness. It's about much bigger things than that. We also need to understand that some groups are disproportionately affected by suicide due to things like discrimination, racism, homophobia, those types of things. We know that individuals and community leaders have to set the pace for this. 988 is a perfect example to collaborate to promote suicide prevention. The 988 Coalition collaboration meeting meets every quarter to promote this, to promote 988 and to have it to move forward. And that success of this strategy ultimately rests with individuals and communities across the United States. So it's all of us, again, looking at how do we prevent suicide? Because here's the thing, a suicide happens out there and it affects us in here. The average suicide death, there are, they say, 6 people immediately affected by that death. It's much larger than that, actually, much, much larger than that are affected by the death. So we all get affected when a community member dies by suicide. And I think the effect is impacted more when it's a youth, when it's a young person that dies. So on that note, let's talk some suicide statistics. I don't know if you've talked about statistics so far, but we'll go quickly through this because statistics are boring. My data is from 2022. I looked for the 2023 data. I couldn't find it. That doesn't mean it's not there. It's just I didn't see it. So we'll go with 2022. Suicide death rates are always slightly behind a couple years usually. It's amazing that that's true considering we can get up to the minute deaths, but not for suicide. So it's a weird thing, right? So we've seen declines of suicide from 2019 and 20. We saw a decline. But in 2021, it increased by 5%, which is actually quite a lot for suicide deaths. The new data was released in 2023. Like I said, I couldn't find 2023's data. The data released in 2023 was for 2022. I know that's really confusing. But again, we saw an increase. What's important here is we saw an increase for 2022 of almost 50,000 people across the age span that died by suicide. And that's another 2.6% increase. For 2023, the expectation is that the death rate will again increase and up to over 50,000 people. There were a couple of groups that did see a decline in numbers. American Indian and Alaska Natives, they were down 6%. They have also always been the highest rate of suicide in the US, that particular population. So to see them come down is really important. And we also saw young folks, rates of suicide go down about 8%. Now, that doesn't mean that we get to relax, because what we know is that that's still very high for youth. That 8%, even though it went down 8%, it's still very high. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that I found some data showing that after 2022, the rate went back up.
Yes. Yeah,
So,
that's what we're expecting.
During the pandemic, it went down and then it went back up.
Yes. Yeah. Isn't that interesting though? When you think about that, you would think during the pandemic, it would have gone way up, right?
Yeah.
It did go up actually for youth during the pandemic. There were more suicide attempts and deaths with youth, particularly during the pandemic. After the pandemic, it came back down. It was low during the pandemic, and then it went up again, which is really weird, right? That's really weird. Why do you suppose, just put this out here as a thinking question, why do you suppose it would go down during the pandemic and then come up again after the pandemic? Community? Yeah, community. There was a lot more, perhaps, connection to families, to parents. Parents were working from home. Kids were going to school at home. For some kids, that was really stressful, and for some, it was not. For some kids that were having a hard time in school, they actually found that being at home and going to school was much easier for them. So less bullying. Just some kids don't do great in a public school in that large environment. Some kids do really better. It's interesting. I won't get on my soapbox, I promise. It's interesting when you look at times when there's been a national tragedy in the US, suicide rates tend to go down, which I find really interesting. Even over like 9/11, if you look at the statistics, they went down, they dropped during 9/11. It'll be interesting to see what happens in the next couple of years with suicide rates.
One thing that we're not even thinking about, the big picture, right? Family size shrunk. If you compare, looking back 100 years, whatever. Family size is shrinking. Social media is putting a lot of pressure on young adults. So there's this awareness of social, what do you look like, what you look like, you have to be like this. So they go out to the schools. My daughter in high school told me, I can't believe you went to high school. You're clueless. How did you survive high school, Mom? I'm like, wow, I didn't speak English. I did my thing. I don't know. They were doing partner on me. I didn't pay attention. But honestly, the
Yeah.
kids in high school, in middle school, there's so much pressure.
I know.
So
There
when
is.
they're not there, they don't have that pressure, I believe.
Yes, I agree.
Where social anxiety is becoming a big deal.
It is. It is a big deal. And we'll talk about that later as a risk factor when about how do we deal with social media with our kids, because they got to have it. They need it. What do we do with it? Yeah, go
I
ahead.
think it's also isolation of families.
Hmm. Yeah.
When we have the poor family, we don't have the village and the family.
Right. And believe it or not, we need the village.
Yeah.
That's how I raised my son. I was a single mom, and I couldn't have raised him all by myself in that insular single mother kid relationship. I built a network of other moms that helped with that, and we helped each other, and that was the village. If I didn't know what was going on with my kid, all I had to do was ask my friend Sonia, and she would let me know for sure, because her daughter would let her mom know what Ben was up to. So it's that idea that we don't have that much anymore, and we need to rebuild that. Okay. I promised I wouldn't get on my soap opera. Okay, we also saw increases in Black and African American populations. We also saw a slight increase in Latinx populations. And then we saw an increase in Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islanders. And that was a pretty big increase. I can't speak to why that increase was so high. Some of the literature suggests because it's population based, that statistic is actually out of sync with what it actually is. All right. What about California? Since this is where we live, that was nationwide. What about here today? We have in California, suicide is 13th leading cause of death, has been for a long time. For 10 to 24-year-olds, it's the third cause of death. So that's pretty high. And for ages 25 to 34, it's the second leading cause of death in the state of California. 44% of our suicide deaths were done by firearm. That's not a surprise, 51% nationwide. And what's interesting is we hear about alcohol-related deaths, right? We hear about it all the time. We don't hear about suicide. And here's the thing. In California, 3 times as many people died by suicide than by alcohol in 2022. So that gives you an idea of where some work needs to be done, that we normalize speaking about suicide. And then the last statistic is just giving us a little bit more condensed nationwide. About 6,000 youth died. It is the third cause of death nationwide. Second cause of death for young children, 10 to 14. That's one of the places where we see suicide rates raising, is for young kids. And we know that we know rates are declining, but they're still way too high. As far as I'm concerned, 1 adolescent is too high. So let's talk about the suicidal mind. Have any of you ever wondered why people kill themselves? This is a question well, okay. So full disclosure, I'm a little bit of a nerd around death and suicide and understanding it. So I find this very fascinating. But let's talk about the suicidal mind and why people die by suicide. And really what this is what we know and what we don't know. And like I said earlier, spoiler alert, we don't know much. And we've been wrong most of the time. That's the other thing you need to know, is that suicide prevention research, even though we research a particular way of understanding suicide, most of the time it's no better than chance. When I work with mental health professionals, which is kind of my niche, I always tell the room that it's your best educated guess about who's going to take their life. You might be wrong, you might be right, but you make your best possible educated guess. And that's the same for you and I. We have to make a guess, and we take all the information we know about a person, and then we make that guess. So if I'm talking to my kid, I'm going to look for behavior changes. What's he been up to lately? What's he doing different? How has his mood changed? Those are the things I'm going to look for to figure out what's going on. So let's take a look briefly at the suicidal mind. Here's what we know. Suicide prevention has been trying to understand suicide since 400 BC. Really. And we've attributed suicide to two things for all these years: mental illness and depression. Now, mental illness and depression absolutely play a role in suicide. They absolutely do, especially for kids, because what we know when we look at statistically at the kids that die by suicide, we see that depression, anxiety play a significant role. But that's not the only reason why anyone takes their life. We know that it's more complex than just depression or mental illness. There's more things going on in a person's life than that. And we need to understand what those things are so we can understand the suicidal act. Dr. Edward Schneidman was one of the first that really studied suicide. He studied suicide notes left. They were in the LA coroner's office, and he studied that. I want to say about 1,000 suicide notes and to understand the suicidal mind. And what he said was, what happens to people when they're suicidal is they feel hopeless, they feel helpless, and they're in a great deal of psychological pain. And he coined the term psychache, which helps us to understand the psyche is aching. And the thing of it is it's really hard to get people to understand that. And this is part of the stigma, right, around suicide, is if I have a broken leg, like I screwed up my knee last week, and so I'm kind of limping, you can see the injury, right, because I'm limping, but you can't see the psychache. So that's something that we have to remember, that people don't often show the psychache. But he said it was about psychache. And we believe that. When I started at CSS, that's one of the ways we understood suicide was they were in psychological pain. There's nothing wrong with that. That's true today, just like it was true then. But Thomas Joyner came along and he decided to build a little bit on Schneidman's theory. And he developed the interpersonal theory of suicide, which really helps to better contextualize the suicidal mind. And what Joyner said was that people are at risk for suicide when they lack meaningful connection. He called it thwarted belongingness. I like meaningful connection better. And he experienced themselves, and they experienced themselves as a burden or perceived burdensomeness. We often hear when someone is suicidal, maybe you've heard this too, them say, "You'd all be better off without me. I'm a burden to my family." Those kinds of statements, and that speaks to that burdensomeness. He also said there's something, and that's nothing new. The thwarted belongingness, perceived burdensomeness is nothing new. That's what Schneidman was saying, and Freud was saying, and a lot of other theorists were saying, is that this hopelessness, this lack of belonging, this feeling of burdensomeness really expands the suicidal feelings, right? But Joyner went a step further and said, you have to be able to actually kill yourself. Killing yourself isn't easy. It takes a lot of guts to be able to inflict that much pain onto your body. Okay. So what he said is you have to have the capacity and to take your life. And he said capacity increases when during increased risk taking. So when someone is doing increased risk taking, there's lots of things that could be increased risk taking. One of the things we look at with kids, we want to, and I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Judy, thank you. What Judy was saying about self-injury, that's one of the things we want to look for, because although self-injury is not suicidal in nature, it can be that capacity building activity that can lead to suicide. So we always want to check in about that with a young person. So this is what makes his approach so unique, is the idea that you have to have capacity. he also he considers racism and racial discrimination as a capacity builder and a stressor for suicide, which is kind of new. We know that racism actually is a risk factor. Discrimination is a risk factor for suicide. Even with Joyner's theory, we still don't know much. Even with Schneidman, we don't know much. So we needed a new approach. And so along came Craig Bryan. And he started looking at different ways of what are we doing in suicide and why isn't it working? And he is leading us away from the mental illness model, actually. And he's looking at building on Joyner and Schneidman, and also acknowledging that we're kind of stuck in that context. It's interesting when we talk about suicide, including youth, that not all suicides can be explained by mental illness. Okay, sometimes mental illness, they may have a mental illness. They may suffer from depression. They may have schizophrenia, but that's not the reason why they're killing themselves. There's some other thing going on over here. May be a factor for sure, and we don't want to discount it, but it also may not have as much to do with the suicidal state as we think. And so Dr. Bryant has moved us further along, and what he says we need to do to get unstuck, because he considers us stuck, is, and I'll read this quote to you, if we want to be better at preventing suicide, we have to become productively stupid. I love that. Suicide is a complex, he calls it a wicked problem that cannot be easily defined and cannot be solved or completely eliminated using approaches that work for conventional problems. Makes sense. No single solution or combination of solutions can be considered right or correct because these strategies may only be better than others under certain conditions or circumstances. Likewise, some strategies and solutions will be worse, but cannot be completely ruled out as wrong. It's a wicked problem, folks, even if they always do worse than other strategies. If we want to be better at preventing suicide, we must adopt a different mindset where we become more comfortable with these complexities and approach suicide as a wicked rather than conventional problem. I don't usually recommend a lot of books. I recommend this one highly.
What's the name of the book?
The name of the book it's by Craig J. Bryan, Bryan, and it's called Rethinking Suicide, Why Prevention Fails and How We Can Do Better. Okay, so keeping this in mind as we go along, keep in mind that we do things that we train our mental health professionals to do assessments in a certain way, and that's good, we should. But we also need to look beyond just that at what we can do for people. Okay. Any questions about that? I know. Now we're up to the good part. Let's talk about risk factors and warning signs. When I think of risk factors and warning signs, excuse me, I need to get a Kleenex here. When I think of risk factors, every time I come out to the valley, my nose runs. There's something about it out here, and I grew up out here. All right. So when I think about risk factors and warning signs, I always think about this as behavioral changes. What have you noticed in the youth that is different than their baseline, right? When I look, and I'll use my son as an example. I know what his baseline behavior is. And when I'm worried about him, I look at what's changed. What's changed in his behavior? And that's the things that we start looking for often are some of these risk factors and warning signs. There's a difference between a risk factor and a warning sign, just so you know. A risk factor is something that's happened in the past, can't be changed. Okay, so that could be the trauma, the divorce, the sexual assault, the bullying, okay? A warning sign, on the other hand, is something that's happening right now, behavioral change in the present, Usually there's something else going on with the warning sign. There's been some sort of loss or some sort of painful event. There are high-risk groups in youth, within the youth population for suicide. One of them is any youth that has experienced racism. So when we think about that, we have to understand that most of our young Black and brown kids have experienced racism and microaggressions. Those increase risk for suicide. Some say they're traumas. I agree. I think it's a trauma. When we look at Black children, 5 to 12, their suicide rate is approximately double that of white children at the same ages. Black adolescent boys in particular have a much higher rate of suicide and suicide attempts, and their suicide attempts are much more lethal than their white counterparts, okay? We know that LGBTQ youth, although not prone to suicide, often have higher rates of suicide attempts. And this is due not because they're gay or lesbian or trans, it's because of the way that they're treated in society, by their families, by their communities, and the stigma that is in society around LGBT. I just did a workshop with Pacific Center, which is a large LGBT organization, and there's a lot of fear right now within this community, and our kids are experiencing that as well. So if if your child identifies as LGBT, you want to take into consideration the things that are happening and how can we better support them, both at school and in the community. We know that LGBT youth are about 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than their peers. One of the best protective factors an LGBTQ youth can have is an accepting adult in their life. It's been shown through Trevor Project is where I got this information. If they have one accepting adult, their outcomes will be better than if they don't. We know that transgender and non-binary youth also experience higher rates of depression and anxiety and thoughts of suicide, and they attempt more often. What's interesting about the LGBT population, we know that they're at higher risk for suicide, but we actually don't know how many folks within this community die by suicide. And the reason for that is actually really simple and simple to fix, but you'd think, most death certificates throughout the United States, there's 2 genders, male and female, nothing else. So unless it's in the coroner's report or some other way you get that information, we don't know that information. Also, youth that are at higher risk are children in the welfare system and juvenile, I think I misspelled juvenile justice systems, and youth who experience any type of trauma. So these are high-risk groups. What a high-risk group means is that it doesn't mean that they're going to kill themselves. It just means that their risk is elevated. The truth is anybody who has experienced trauma in their life has a higher risk for suicide. Doesn't mean you're going to kill yourself, but your risk goes up, okay? It's when the risk factors merge together along with warning signs that it can become a lethal situation. There are also gender differences just in general. We have noticed that across the age span, women's rates are increasing. It's always been that men die more often, and still men are dying more often by suicide than women. And that's, really basically because of the methods in which a man chooses, and this includes a kid. A lot of kids use guns, but that's generally, and I'm really generalizing broadly here, it's males that tend to use more lethal means than females. Drivers are the things that are driving the suicide, the situations in a child's life that can be going on. Family problems, school problems. This is no big surprise. Grief or loss. They've lost something, not necessarily a person, but some other major loss in their life. Major disappointment, what I've seen historically with kids, especially this time of year, as early acceptance comes out for college. They've applied for the 1 or 2 colleges that are acceptable to their family, and they don't get into them. That's a major disappointment. Okay. Other major disappointments, didn't get asked to the prom. You know, these things seem a little silly to us at this age, but at this time, but to them, that's a big deal. Okay. Any kind of trauma and stress. And it's not on this slide, but we're speaking around it. We're talking about bullying and cyberbullying. Social media. Social media is an issue, and it can be a driver in the suicide. Thing with social media is that it's complex. Our kids learned to communicate through social media more during the pandemic because it was the only way they could reach out to their friends. And now they're kind of used to doing that. And I'll tell you, I'll be honest, it took me a bit to remove myself from that, from only reaching out on social media when we got kind of back to normal. So what do we do with that? We help our kids learn to manage their social media use. If you are a parent and you have a child, the most important thing you can do around social media is teach them how to use it properly. Teach them when to turn it off. Teach them how to make friends on social media. Don't be afraid to put parental controls on it so that they don't have it. Make times when the phone gets turned off. When my son was growing up, social media was just a thing. It was MySpace, right? That was the cool thing. And I woke up one night, I'll never forget this. I woke up and he was, maybe in 8th grade. And I woke up and his light was on and I was like, what's going on? It's like 2:00 in the morning. And I walk in and he's on his phone. And I'm like, oh, dude, no way. And, mad. Oh, he was furious at me. And I took the phone from him and I turned it off and I said, you can have it back after school tomorrow. Phone goes off at 10:00. You get it when your homework is done. Now, my kid never did homework. He didn't need to. He could always just finish it in class. So anyway, but I had to have rules around that. And it's okay as a parent to set boundaries with your kids. It's good for them. Boundaries are good for your kids. It helps them learn, helps them understand what they can do and can't do. Okay. All right. So those are, there could be 100 other drivers in this. So, it's it's pretty broad. There are some risk factors that I think are important to look at. Mental illness, substance use. If your kids are using substances, that can be a factor in suicide and suicidality. We know that exposure, we were talking about contagion. And contagion can be a friend that they know. It can also be a celebrity that they admire. So that can be part of it. Lack of acceptance, discrimination, racism, violence. Family violence, is there domestic violence going on? Isolation, bullying. These are some of the risk factors. As you can see, there's quite a few of them. Not having coping strategies. That's what a safety plan can do. And we'll talk about a safety plan in a little bit. But a safety plan can help a child develop coping strategies. Gives them an opportunity to know, oh, so I'm having these feelings, and what I need to do is go for a walk, or play with my dog, or call my friend, or call 988. And so it gives them that opportunity to do that. The other thing that is one of the biggest risk factors of all is easy access to guns or medication in the home. And that includes medication, alcohol. Okay. So if you have a gun, and some of us do, my son has guns, and he lives with me, and we keep him locked up. Keep him locked up. And he keeps the ammunition locked in a separate place. And then medication, the same thing. You want to keep it locked up. And like, if you buy Tylenol and you go to Costco and you get the jar like this of Tylenol, right? Instead, go to CVS and buy the small one. Because Tylenol will kill you just slowly. Okay. And then we've already talked about social media. There can be a lot of different risk factors for young people. Trauma, I think, is probably the biggest one. I think that when a child has experienced a lot of trauma, that can be a big risk factor. Know the warning signs. Do you know the warning signs for suicide as we sit here talking about this? What warning signs do is help us determine if a youth is at risk. Okay. And they say in this, especially if this is a new behavior, it's increased or seems related to a painful loss or change. So the ones in red are the ones that are most important to pay attention to. The one that I want you to be really aware of is if your youth is talking about wanting to die in any way, directly, indirectly. If you think it's like like Judy was talking about, is it attention seeking? We never take talk of suicide as attention seeking, never. Even if we think it might be, we take it seriously. And the best way what to do is to, of course, ask them, are they thinking about suicide? Other things to keep in mind, are they looking for a way to kill themselves? Either online or around the house? Have they thought about buying a gun if they're old enough? By the way, just so you know, getting a gun is not that hard. It's actually pretty simple to just go out on the street and buy a gun. So, you know, just to frame that for you. Feeling hopeless, having no reason to live, feeling trapped, that unbearable pain. And being a burden, feeling like they're a burden. Other things to keep an eye on when we talk about warning signs is alcohol or drugs. Are they using alcohol or drugs? Sometimes that's hard to know as a parent. Are they anxious? Has their behavior changed? Are they agitated? Are they being more reckless? Are they sleeping a lot or not enough? I always do a little sidebar here about sleeping. How many hours of sleep should a teenager get? Yeah, 8 to 10 hours of sleep a night. What is the average? Yeah, 6 or 7 is average. So just in general, our kids are sleep deprived. And you see that if you've been in a classroom, especially first thing in the morning. You can tell the ones that have been up all night on social media. Just so you know. So talk to your kids about good sleep, what good sleep is. It's really important. And then, you know, practice what you preach, because I'm the worst. I stay up late and I tell my son, you need to go to bed. Mom, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. You're still up. You know, so we have that conversation. Withdrawing or isolating, showing rage or seeking revenge. I'm gonna get even. And then mood swings. And when I say mood swings, I'm not necessarily talking about bipolar disorder, although there's definitely mood swings involved there. I'm talking about your child has been depressed and anxious and not communicating and sad and all of those things. And then all of a sudden, they seem to get better. They seem to feel better. They seem to be engaged more. Maybe they're feeling better. Maybe that is the answer, that they've figured out whatever it is they needed to figure out. Sometimes that's not the answer, and sometimes what that answer is, they've decided to take their life. They've made a final decision, and kids can make that final decision just like adults can. So you want to pay attention to that. See what's going on about it. All right. So now let's listen to a video. This is, how many of you know who Kevin Hines is? Yeah, I know Marcia knows.
Yes, seen him live in one of the early.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and you've seen this video before with here. I'm going to play a quick video. It's 5 minutes long. And this is Kevin's story about jumping from the Golden Gate Bridge. It's just a brief story. Kevin is one of the few people who have survived the jump off the Golden Gate Bridge. And he talks very eloquently about what that was like for him. So I want you to listen as you listen to this story. Listen to the warning signs and risk factors, because there's only a couple, but listen to them. This does not have anything graphic in it. However, it does have images of the Golden Gate Bridge. And I know for some folks that can be really challenging. So if you feel that that's too much, please step away. If you're online, please just, blank your screen or do what you have to do. It's about 5 minutes long. Okay, I'm going to start it right now.
We have lost far too many lives traveling the path to this day. Since 1937, over 2,000 people have died at the Golden Gate Bridge. I feel lucky to be alive every single day. Of the thousands that have died off the Golden Gate Bridge, I am of the 1% who have survived. So I was born on drugs and premature. And then I bounced around from home to home. Nobody wanted to keep me because I was sick. And I got lucky. I landed in the home of Patrick and Deborah Hines. I had a great childhood. I thought growing up that everything's going to be great. And then at 17, it all came crashing down. If you can imagine feeling that everyone around you is out to get you, trying to hurt you, and trying to kill you. And you believe that to be the truth. From the extreme paranoia, I exhibited symptoms of mania. From the mania came the hallucinations, both auditory and visual. And so with that and the bipolar disorder, I just was spiraling out of control. I vividly remember writing my suicide note. And people don't get it. Like, I thought I was a burden to everyone who loved me because that's what my brain told me, because that's how powerful your brain is. I got off the bus. I walked slowly down the walkway of the Golden Gate Bridge. People rode by me, drove by me, walked by me, and a woman approached me. And she said, "Will you take my picture?" She said, "Thanks," and she walked away. It was that moment I just said, nobody cares. The reality was that everybody cared. Just couldn't see it. I ran forward, and using my two hands, I catapulted myself into free fall. What I'm about to say is the exact same thing that 19 Golden Gate Bridge jump survivors have also said. The millisecond my hands left the rail, it was an instant regret. And I remember thinking, no one's gonna know that I didn't want to die. In 4 seconds, I fell 75 miles an hour, 25 stories, and I hit the water. I was in the most physical pain I had ever experienced. I have ever experienced. The Coast Guard was amazing. He was just so freaked out that I was alive that he just dove in and brought me on board. The guy said, "Do you know how many people we pull out of this water that are already dead?" And I said, "No, and I don't want to know." The guy put his hand on my forehead, said, "Kid, you're a miracle." My father took one step into the hospital room, and I looked up at him and I said, "Dad, I'm sorry." And he said, "No, Kevin, I'm sorry." And if you think about it, both of our immediate reactions were guilt. Guilt that didn't belong to either of us. And even though I didn't die, I caused people a great deal of grief and pain. Just the day of my attempt still sits within them today. I asked my father if he still feared my death by suicide. He said, every time the phone goes off, his first inclination is Kevin alive. I had that impact on my dad. So after the jump, the road to recovery was pretty long. I had 7 psych ward stays in the next 11 years. I still have all the symptoms I ever had. Mania, depression, psychosis, hallucinations, all that's still there. I just know how to cope with it and I know how to beat it. I built a support network over these years of treatment so that I wouldn't be fighting this alone. So it's okay not to be okay. It's not okay not to ask for someone to back you up. To the families who live with the loss or losses of loved ones, they didn't do that to hurt you or destroy your life. They took their lives because they were struggling and in a great deal of emotional and mental pain. Suicide, mental illness, and addiction are the only diseases that we blame the person for perpetually. But people die from suicide just like they die from any other organ diseased. today, no matter the pain I'm in, no matter the struggles I experience, I do believe that life is the greatest gift we've ever been given. And if you're suffering mentally, don't wait like I did, sitting in denial for so long. Because recovery happens. Living proof.
What were some of the warning signs Kevin had? Did you hear warning signs, risk factors, either one? And a protective factor.
Actually, I don't know if he said this, but as a family member, I think, was he becoming more withdrawn from his family?
Yes, yes, he was. He was. His dad had come in the room that morning and said, come on, Kevin, knew something was wrong, just didn't know what to ask him. And said, come on, Kevin, let's go to work, we'll go to a movie, whatever. And Kevin said no. So yeah, he was withdrawing. Yeah. He doesn't talk about that in this video
No,
clip.
but it's clear.
Yeah, it's clear. It is.
But that's always the case with the early, early ages, right? The onset of any mental illness. They pull back, and as a family member, you don't know how to reach them.
That's right. We don't know. We have to just do our best. That's all we can do is our best. We just have to keep trying. We can't give up, and that's the hardest part of all, is to keep trying and not give up, because it's frustrating, right? I'm sure Kevin's father was frustrated. He knew something was wrong with Kevin, but he didn't know how to help. He didn't know what to do. No, go ahead.
I'm not sure that there's always something that you can do to prevent suicide.
That's right. Right. I hate that slogan that they use in suicide. Suicide is preventable. Maybe in some cases it is, but I don't know that it's always. We can't make a blanket statement like that and say every suicide is preventable. I hate that.
That's what I said.
Yeah.
Can I see something funny after everything's all?
Yes, we could use a little humor.
Because there is a group of ministers that were doing suicide prevention activities on the Golden Gate Bridge.
Uh-huh.
So they would walk up and down. Somebody was looking over the edge. It's walking up.
Yes.
And
Bridge angels, I believe they were
yeah,
called.
bridge angels, right.
Yes.
And so this one minister was telling me that there was a guy looking over the edge, and there were like 4 or 5 different ministers that day. And he said, everybody's so friendly here.
Yeah, because we want to make sure you don't jump.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah. I know, Marcia, I'm late.
It's okay. Yeah, we have another speaker.
Yeah, I'm gonna quick this part.
It's killing me to say.
I know, it's okay. Let's talk about, so you notice all these risk factors, you know what's going on with someone. What do you do? That's a big question, right?
I know what we did.
Go ahead, share it.
We watched every minute and it still didn't.
Sometimes it doesn't. We can do, listen, here's the thing. I'm going to tell you things to do. And one thing I want to make really clear. Sometimes no matter what you do, if you do everything perfectly, if you watch them, you take care of them, you take them to the hospital, you do all of these things. And sometimes still people die by suicide. Because sometimes it's their choice. So, but in the meantime, we want to do what we can do. And the first thing we can do is ask. If you see somebody's behavior change, ask them. Ask them if they're suicidal. They may say no. And you may think differently. But ask. Don't be afraid to ask about suicide. Once you've determined that they are talking about suicide, be there for them. That means hang out with them, call them, talk to them, do things with them. I loved what Judy was saying earlier about, I really liked it, about what you did with your son, to kind of keep that connection. I did something very similar with mine. We made Sundays family day and we stayed together. And as he got older, he wanted, of course, to be with his friends. And so you can stay with your friends until
like 2 o'clock, and then you come home and we have family dinner and we cook together. And it was once a week. It was no big deal, but it got us talking, and we still do that to this day. So be there for them. Find something they like to do and do it with them. Sometimes the best thing to do is I'll just sit here with you quietly. It's okay with me. You don't have to talk. You know I'm here. Help them, help keep them safe. What this means is you're going to ask some clarifying questions about suicide. If they say yes, these are not linear. If they say yes, then you want to find out, have they thought about how they would kill themselves? When they would do it? Do they have access to the means? Those kinds of questions. Have they done anything to harm themselves already? Especially with kids, because they may have taken pills that you don't know about. Okay. If you feel at that point that the only way to keep them safe is to take them to the hospital, then do that. Take them to the emergency room. For kids 0 to 12 in Alameda County, Children's Hospital is the place to go. For 13 and above, you go to Willow Rock. Okay. And then Kaiser has its own deal. And, I always suggest you check with your primary carrier, your insurance carrier. If they don't have a plan and things like that, then talk to them about a safety plan. How are you going to stay safe? What are you going to do? A safety plan, you can go online on your phone to Safety Net. And that is the Stanley and Brown Safety Net safety plan. And it's 5 steps. That it's coping skills. How do I cope with this? People I can go to when I'm in trouble, places I can go to, professionals that I can contact. And one thing that will keep me alive. Don't ever hesitate. We ask why you want to die all the time. Ask why they want to live. Help them get in touch with what's important for life. Okay. And then help them connect to other, that can be other people. It can be maybe their school therapist or their clergy, friends. Who can they connect with? Where can they go? The library, Starbucks, when they're feeling really alone and isolated, can they go someplace where they can feel next to people? And then the last thing is follow up. Make sure you check in with them. If you talk to them today, call them tomorrow and see how they're doing. If it's a family and you happen to be the person that the kid came to, ask the family, can I bring you dinner tonight? Follow up. Keep them informed. Okay. The last thing I'll say, Marcia, she's grateful right now because I could have gone on for another hour, is self-care. We talked about self-care in the very beginning. Deep breathing is a great way to take care of yourself. Please find something to take care of yourself. Find some way to do something after today. Practice self-care every day. It's a practice, even if it's hard, okay? And I know it is. Like I said, the slides are available. You can reach out to me, and I will I will send them to you. You can read everything we missed. Questions? Okay, those are just slides.
I guess I do. Workshop.
Yes. We have a whole workshop that we do just for teachers. It's geared to go during their staff meetings, or yeah. And it's 50 to 60 minutes long. We can tailor it. And it's really about identification and referral. We don't go into all this detail. We just.
So this would be for the PT.
Yes, we have one for PTA for parents. I give you guys a little bit more because you have a little bit more experience. And so, for example, the PTA one we call it Suicide 101 for parents. And we can do it in English, we can do it in Spanish.
And it again is about an hour, hour and a half, and it goes over much of the same information.
I need to come.
Okay. You can take my business card too, and yeah, we can definitely do that. Any other questions? I know, Marcia, I'm sorry.
No
All right.
pressure.
No pressure, you guys. Thank you all so very much for being here and sitting through this. And if you want to reach out to me, for some reason it won't go. There we go. Please feel free. If you want to reach out to my program director, feel free to reach out to her too. Okay. But if you want the slides, again, I'll send them to Marcia. But if you want them directly, I can send them to you as well. Thank you all very much. Marcia?
Okay, here we go.
Here we go.
Thank you. Wallpaper.
I know. I have a lot of these. Well, I was glad to be here for your first youth workshop. This was really great. I'm glad you're doing this.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for all the work you do. All right.
So we'd like to go on to our next speaker, Lynn Gardner-Hackett, who's the Executive Director of Genesis Community Development Corporation. She's going to speak on a clarion call, the crisis in Black teen and young adult suicides. Lynn earned her MBA from the University of Washington and an MS in counseling from California State University, Hayward, my old school. Yay. With an emphasis on marriage and family therapy. So Lynn,
Take it away.
take it away.
All right. Well, how's everybody doing today? Good. I'm so thrilled to be able to be here with you. And I wanted to ask those of you who are actually in the room if you would complete an evaluation so that we can do the documentation for the grants that we have. And those online, hopefully, we can get some input from you all. So, as Marcia mentioned, I have worked with her for quite a few years. I've worked at Horizons Family Counseling in Livermore. I was the manager of the counseling department at the PD, and I would do a number of presentations. Now, Marcia, I'm going to need to figure out how to make this shift over. Is it
Okay,
that
there.
little one?
So that right there.
Okay, all right. So I would do NAMI presentations all the time. And when she asked me to participate in this, I'm very excited because I am now in a different position in terms of with the program that I have, and we're pretty excited about all the things that we are trying to do. We are trying to bring to the Bay Area, or actually anywhere that Zoom can reach, information about not just suicide, but mental health issues that impact kids and parents. So we have a series of workshops, and you all can pick up in the back, or we can pass these around, that cover topics such as anxiety and depression and school avoidance. That's where I was just a few minutes ago at the Pleasant and Unified School District. They have a Black History program going on, and I did a presentation on school avoidance, which has become a really big issue for everyone. And so while I was researching topics, I discovered that Black teen and young adult suicides had skyrocketed. I had no idea I was doing this. I had taken my break of being retired for a year. And then I came back and started getting back into the presentations, and I said, oh my God. So I was pleased to be able to connect with Marcia and also with Cris, who allowed me to speak at their 988 conference, suicide conference. And that's where Marcia and Mark got a chance to look at the presentation and approve for me to do this. Now, I know you've done some of this information, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time repeating what Cris had mentioned to you, but we're going to talk about, from a Black perspective, understanding historical trauma, doing some multi-level interventions and supportive resources. So there have been a lot of research studies that have taken place since about 2019, actually. 2019, they had a research called Ring the Bell, and that was sponsored by the Black Caucus. And they found that we were like way out of kilter in terms of the number of Blacks committing suicide. But then every year at each school, the CDC does this youth risk behavior surveillance survey. And that allows us to see what's going on a number of scales, how the kids feel about belonging in school and how they feel about being bullied and all kinds of stuff, physical abuse. So I have been calculating some of that sort of stuff, but I wanted you to know that in the survey from 2013 to 2023, so what they do is they do the annual survey and then they do a 10-year projection. And so in the one from last year, it was the challenge had been that violence is going up in schools, that poor mental health is really becoming more and more evident, and that's just going to explode in this next few years. We might as well tell the truth. And suicidal thoughts and actually doing it is on the rise just from 2023. So the one thing that did go down in that survey was that students don't use as many drugs and substances, and their sexual activity decreased. But they didn't take precautions, which is really concerning because now we're going to have some babies that are going to be popping up here pretty soon, which will be a problem. So that Ring the Alarm, that was a 41-page. They had congressional hearings on it, but it didn't get out anywhere. I never heard about it. Nobody, I mean, this is like news to a lot of Black parents and people who are working with Black youth. So I am trying to get the word out as much as possible. And I know that Cris gave you some stats about the second leading cause of death in Black children, 10 to 14, and then the third leading in adolescents. So I won't labor on that. We know that only 1 in 3 African-American adults get even seek the mental health treatment that they need. So it is something that is increasing, and I'm extremely concerned because as we have seen some of the changes from the administration, we are going to be seeing a lot more, and people are going to be stressed out. Our kids don't want to say anything to the parents because they know they're stressed out. So they're like, I already know you're stressed out, but now if I tell you that I'm suicidal or I'm thinking of suicide, that's going to be another stressor. And so we've got to find a way to destigmatize and to work with all collaborations within the community to help our children. Now, this is a PBS NewsHour talking about suicide in the Black community. So I wanted to let you see that.
For years, experts have warned about a growing mental health crisis among America's young people. But within that trend, there are important signals about racial disparities. Between the years 2018 and 2022, the suicide rate among Black youth rose by more than 50%, for the first time surpassing white youth, who saw a 17% decline. Special correspondent Fred DeSam Lazaro has this story from Chicago, the first of 2 reports. It's part of our Race Matters coverage. And a warning, this story discusses topics of suicide that may be difficult for some viewers.
He had a personality that was so contagious. He was so in love with being a good person.
From an early age, Jamal Clay wanted to be helpful.
Some of my fondest memories of Jamal is remembering him waking me up early in the morning so we can get to school a little bit before the kids so that he could take the chairs off the desk and help the teachers, prepare for school.
He looked everyone in the eye and gave them his undivided attention. As time went on, however, Rafia Maxey Cole noticed changes in her son. He drew into himself, grew quieter, spent more time alone. Maxey Cole knew Clay was teased at school over his body type. At one point, he tried to take his own life and was rushed to the hospital.
A social worker, mother, traumatized, figuring out which role I have. Well, my 12-year-old is in an isolation unit.
Clay was ultimately released from the hospital, but in the years that followed, his struggles widened.
Many of the struggles that my son dealt with was, of course, being a product of a single parent and not having the closest relationship with his father, trying to be the man of the house because there was no male, and not knowing how that goes. I remember him telling me, I learned how to tie my tie, Ma, by going on YouTube. And that broke my heart.
On May 27, 2020, Jamal Clay died by suicide at the age of 19.
It rocked my whole foundation. Because how do you go to work and one of your main jobs is to keep people safe? And you ain't got nobody safe at your home. I have so many questions, and he has all the answers.
Between 2015 and 2021, more than 360 Black people died by suicide in Chicago. According to a University of Chicago study, the trends in that time largely mirrored what happened nationally. Black residents were the only group to experience significant increases in suicides among both men and women. Meanwhile, suicides decreased among white men and women. There was also a higher proportion of suicide deaths among Black teens, and the youngest person to die by suicide was an 8-year-old Black boy. Professor Janelle Goodwill co-authored that research at the University of Chicago.
I have had the opportunity to directly ask people, particularly Black young adults, why they've considered ending their lives. And one of the primary reasons they've pointed to is feeling hopeless about the future. Hopelessness on an individual level, but also hopelessness on a structural level.
Chicago has been called one of America's most segregated cities, and the disparities are striking. Even though Blacks account for fewer than a third of this city's residents, they make up nearly half of those living in poverty, 70% of people in jail, and 3/4 of all victims of gun violence.
How much of those contributing factors, how much of those are at the baseline of the cumulative problem that you have?
Yeah, I think that's a really important word that you use, is cumulative. There's rarely one reason that leads someone to consider suicide. It's not just these individual level factors like stigma, but these larger systemic or structural level factors that are shaping an individual's ability to have access to clean air, to quality schools, to adequate healthcare. Do they have access to quality foods? And do they have a strong social safety net and support?
In 2019, the Congressional Black Caucus released a report on the national crisis with recommendations for tackling it, including increased funds to research the rise in Black youth suicide. The National Institute of Mental Health has since granted millions of dollars for the effort.
As a Black person, as a youth, you must have these blinders on, just like a horse in a race, because you can't look left and right. You just have to keep forward.
Maxey Cole notes her son died just 2 days after George Floyd was murdered by police in Minneapolis. She says living in a society rife with systemic and structural racism is like having a headache that never goes away. And she says a stereotype of endless resilience within the Black community can be taxing.
I'm so sick and tired of being Black and gotta be strong. Be Black and be a strong woman. You can survive. I'm tired. Everything in this house represents struggle. It represents somebody who came from up and under. And I get that. I lean on that. But sometimes you get mad because it feels unfair. It's like my child is dead. but I still gotta be strong, I will never see my son do those things.
After her son's death, Maxie Cole created an organization, Soul Survivors of Chicago. She advocates for suicide prevention and mental health awareness, hoping to tackle what she sees as enduring stigma in the community.
Sure.
Soul Survivors also provide support for people of color who've lost loved ones to suicide.
Welcome to the show, Breaking the Silence, provided by Soul Survivors of Chicago.
Maxie Cole hosts a public access talk show where she speaks to guests about mental health.
You can see my life and what I'm doing with it to normalize the conversation about this happening and what happens when this happens and what we feel. I take on the charge and wave the flag. Does it hurt? Hell yes. Do I like it? Not always. But I'm here to say I will stand in that place so that you don't have to imagine.
Earlier this year, on an episode of Breaking the Silence, Maxie Cole interviewed Noah Boynton, a 17-year-old from Chicago's South Side. Boynton spoke about his own mental health struggles and the help he eventually received. Tomorrow night, we will share Noah Boynton's story and explore how a shortage of mental health providers is exacerbating this crisis. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Fred DeSam-Lazaro in Chicago.
And Fred's reporting is a partnership with for years.
Okay. So the one thing I wanted to share with you is from that video clip is that the mother talking about how tired she is. And if you recall, just recently, the Surgeon General talked about parents and their crisis of being able to even function because they seemed overwhelmed. Imagine if you put all of the things like racism, higher unemployment. I'm trying to make sure. Financial and food insecurity and all those sorts of things on top of just the pressure of being a Black person in a society that doesn't want you. That's just the reality. And we've seen bits and pieces of it, but now it's really coming to bear on our children, and we're losing generations. Every time I do this presentation, to be perfectly honest, I find that somebody that I'm talking to has an experience. And I did one for my church. We did an intergenerational kind of activity, and we were trying to match seniors with the young people. And afterwards, people liked it so much that they said, we want to do a second part, which was great because our pastor is very supportive. So we did the second part, and I talked to a young lady who was at the first one, and I said, what did you think? Not during the second part, but a couple of weeks later. And she said, it could have been me. And I said, really? So what's going on? And she said that her parents, she tried to talk to them. They didn't understand. And if it wasn't for her grandparents coming in and bringing her home with them so that she could hear that presentation, and this is from LA to Fremont, so that she could hear that presentation, that she didn't feel that she was all alone and causing the problem. And now she's doing very well. She's going to community college and that sort of stuff, but just the weight sometimes is overwhelming. And so if you see a person who is angry and of color, sometimes that happens because there is no relief. So being sensitive to that issue and talking to people is a really good thing. Okay. Something else I didn't know is that Black youth with an incarcerated parent is more than 65% chance of becoming homeless. That is just to be that person to be incarcerated. And then if the mother is incarcerated, the young man is more likely to build a suicide plan. They're really getting ready to check out. So it's very sad. Now this, I want you to look at this. Nobody gets hurt, so I'm giving you the caveat. But you will see some of the things that Cris talked about in terms of the signs and symptoms. And then we can chat in terms of the next. The first part doesn't have voice, but it will.
PTSD stands for post-traumatic stress disorder. It is characterized by the failure to recover after experiencing a certain degree of trauma. Children and teens could have PTSD if they have lived through an event that could have caused them or someone else to be killed or badly hurt. Such events include sexual or physical abuse or other violent crimes. Other events that can cause PTSD are war, a friend's suicide, or seeing violence in an area they live. There are teenagers all across this country and maybe even in this classroom dealing with PTSD each and every day. Lack of money, lack of food, violent communities, and facing homelessness can easily trigger PTSD. The symptoms of PTSD are agitation, irritability, hostility, hypervigilance, self-destructive behavior, or social isolation. Fear, severe anxiety or mistrust, loss of interest or pleasure in activities, guilt or loneliness, insomnia or nightmares. The symptoms of the trauma usually begin within 3 months of the event, but when it comes to an ongoing and sometimes never-ending event such as poverty, there's no telling how long it can affect you. Not only is PTSD high in African Americans, but a PTSD diagnosis is more common in women because Black men are less likely to receive a diagnosis of PTSD. Black men are reluctant about going to a doctor for several reasons. They often don't want to be perceived as weak or weird. They're also afraid of being misdiagnosed. There just isn't a lot of support for Black men who have PTSD. Psychologists and therapists have found multiple ways for their patients to receive therapy and relieve stress. Sometimes the patient doesn't even realize it. If you are feeling the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, don't be afraid to ask for help. Speak to your parents, school guidance counselor, nurse, administrator, or call the Suicide Prevention Lifeline immediately. You are not alone.
Yeah, it's very impactful. And I think that so many times it's hard for people who are not impacted by institutional racism to understand. So that's why I'm trying to help you to see that picture, because he's not the only one that goes through this sort of stuff. And historical trauma, I know people get, oh, let it go, it's back in the past, but you can't let it go if you haven't healed it, and you can't heal it until you talk about it. So.
Yeah, Lynn, I have a question.
Mhm.
Given the new federal administration and the racism that's just absolutely, you know, if anyone is offended, come talk to me. I find it disgusting. I have a daughter-in-law who's Black. I have a precious grandson and granddaughter who are biracial. And it is, I am so worried about this. And I'm hoping that the NAMI organizations will be able to find a way to step in as part of a larger community in order to make sure that our folks are safe.
Yes.
So I have a real high urgency on this. And it's the National Institute of Mental Health. All these particular agencies may lose their funding. So it has to be, I believe, grassroots from the ground up.
Right.
And that is, you know.
I think also partnering with Black churches will help to get the resources out there and brought to bear. You guys have the knowledge. The churches are just beginning to get into, oh, it is a problem for us. So yeah, I guess we should be addressing this. Because traditionally, people who were misdiagnosed felt that that was just another way of pigeonholing them. And so as a result, they weren't willing to go and get the help that they need. But some churches are very progressive, and they've had enough losses to really say, we need to do mental health 101, and we need to gather the troops. So trying to maybe do something together to identify what some of those churches are. I know you guys have a great collaborative that works with people in the barbershops, because barbers are trusted. And so I looked at that and said, now that's great. You got to go to the beauty shops too, because the women need to be able to be trained and tuned. So that's a couple of things. I think on a personal level, to just be open and honest with the kids in terms of what they're going to face, because they're going to face it. Somebody's going to say something, they're going to do social media hate speech, and they're going to be like, whoa, they'll be blindsided if you don't have those personal conversations with them to say, this is disgusting. We disagree as a family with this, but you may hear some very vitriol things coming across when you're in school now. And you can go to the principal, but then it's up to the parent to follow up. Yes, you have it.
Yeah, I wonder if you could comment a little bit about the problem when you talk about the stigma of mental illness in the Black community. I'm a retired psychologist, and one of the things that I tried to do was to work through Girls Inc., which was a
I know Girls Inc.
You're familiar with that? In Omaha, Nebraska.
Oh, okay.
And so I tried to set up a program through Girls Inc. For girls
girls who had experienced PTSD
Mhm.
due to violence.
Mm-hmm.
And I could not get a single family to give consent. And the reason they gave me was that they were afraid that if there was somebody professional, a psychologist involved, that might get them into the system.
For like special ed or child welfare?
Child welfare.
Uh-huh.
Because they're afraid their children would report
Mm-hmm.
violence in the community.
Mm-hmm.
And within the home.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a challenge that I could not overcome sometimes because families were afraid for their children to come to me. I'm white, but even with Black psychologists,
Right.
you know, that their fear is that the welfare system has been so corrupt and so racist over the years that they're afraid their children are going to be taken away from them. So it seems to me that one of the things that you're saying with having the Black church involved makes a lot of sense because it kind of gives an okay to seeking that help.
Right, to admit that you need help and services.
And of course, the barbershops have really done a lot of work with trying to overcome that stigma, but it's a very difficult, challenging thing. Mental health professionals are in great demand. There aren't enough of them.
Right.
And then on top of that, somebody who has this kind of trauma in their lives is not in a position to seek help a lot of times.
Well, I think the other thing is that there is security in knowing that somebody who looks like you and has gone through it understands without having to go back in history and bring all the crap up, right? So, yes, I'm sorry.
There's a time in my life where I was providing psychotherapy for Black youth. And I had a moment when I was meeting with the children and the youth that I felt it was unfair. That they were seen as problem children and that they needed to go get help because they're the problem.
Right.
I think that is I don't think that's the solution. It is going to be the church. It is a community that has to come together and support the children. It is so unfair for these children to be told that they are the problem when they're not.
Right. Absolutely.
It is society's problem. It's the community that needs to come together and support the child. We do that for a lot of kids where we talk about, build a village for a child.
Right.
We need that for our Black youth.
Yeah, so I agree with that completely. The problem is that then there are some youth or children within that community who require more than what a community can give them, what a church can give them. They have serious mental illness of one kind or another. And there have been a lot of problems with misdiagnosis, as you mentioned. So people are reluctant to go to a mental health provider because of that. So for the psychological community, mental health community who are trying to provide care, it's a dilemma. I mean, it's a real challenge to figure out how to help families to identify kids who really, it's not a problem of them saying that it's not that the child is being blamed. That is a big problem. Schools do that a lot.
Horrible.
Right. But also within that, there are some kids who really do need that individual help.
Oh, yeah. No question.
And how do you get that for them?
Yeah. A lot of the kids that I saw came with, I want to say normal problems.
Yes.
And I felt like a lot of times people were like, they need medications.
Right. That's the cheap way of doing it. Well, I appreciate it, guys. This is absolutely important, and I'm more than happy to come back and do something else and continue the discussion. So I
Consider it a done deal.
Okay, all right, because it's definitely,
Yeah.
let me just see if I can go through, how much time do I have left?
Well, it's 1:28 and, Brian is due.
Okay, let me, no, that's okay. Solution Island. So here's a couple of things that I put together as suggestions for individual interventions. Let me see. Yeah. So we all have to take responsibility for breaking the silence. And I do this for transitional age youth 18 to 24 in the community colleges to help them understand that they do need to reach out and ask for help, and then to use the counseling services that are available. One thing I will say is that for the first time, about 3 years ago, the APA put out that memo apologizing to people of color for their participation in racism. And yeah, American Psychological Association. And you can go on their website now and find it and download it and kind of read it and say, okay, they're starting to recognize. Now, it did take people of color who were heading that up at the time to kind of push that over the edge. But that is one of the key things. And let me see. On the church, I have some more. For churches to break the silence, educate the congregation through sermons. And I say, figure out all the people who were in the Bible that had mental health issues and talk about that. You know, it's basically so that you can kind of normalize the situation. There are negative stereotypes. I believe very strongly that we as adults have got to help our kids deal with social media, which then means we have to deal with social media because we have abdicated our responsibility. That it was a good babysitter, but it's now a horrendous. It is horrendous if you see all the stuff that is out there on social media and the hate speech and all that sort of stuff. So we have to get people to learn a different way of communicating and turning the screens off, which then means that we as adults have to turn the screens off, right? And I see so many times when people are supposed to be doing something fun and having a social event, everybody's in their phone, nobody's looking at each other or talking. And guess what? Mr. Zuckerberg, he doesn't allow his kids to be on social media. That is a fact. He does not allow them to be on social media because of the fact that they have set it up with the algorithms to keep us scrolling. It's worse than a drug addiction. And we have got to step back and say, no more. This is not going to work. So I do have some supportive documentation. This Unraveling the Stigma was a great document, and it talks about all the things to look for. And just like we said before, they are really, a person of color is worried about losing control over their children, just like any other person would be. But because the system is set up to destroy, so to speak, it makes it that much more difficult. So we've got to start building relationships between pastors, between organizations, so that they feel and trust. And if they say, I trust this organization, then the people will be much more willing to listen and adhere, so to speak, as opposed to, oh, you just coming in out the blue and you're going to tell me what to do? Doesn't work that way. Just wanted just one more slide, Marcia.
Sure.
This is my takeaway slide. I love this slide. This is what our organization is all about. How do we help build strong children versus spending all this time and money after they get put in jail and they've suffered so much trying to repair broken men. So you can, Frederick Douglass was a famous African-American educator, scholar, and everything else. This is my info. Again, you have it on the brochures. My phone number and my information is there. I appreciate the time that you have. If you guys finish the evaluations, that would help me. Okay.
And this is for Lynn's organization.
Yes.
We still have an evaluation after Brian Laurence finishes his talk. So,
yes.
Oh, thank you so much.
You're
We
welcome.
want to acknowledge
Perfect.
and
It's the first one.
appreciation. And I hope that you come back.
Oh, I definitely will. We can have a series, guys.
Well,
We can
let's
have a
talk.
series.
Let's
Okay.
series.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
To Brian Laurence, our final speaker, and he's going to be talking about self-care for the caregiver. Brian is a retired police lieutenant with over 32 years of law enforcement experience and an MFT. So he presents on a number of topics to law enforcement and community-based organizations to include crisis de-escalation and suicide prevention for family and caregiver. Brian.
Thank you so much. Is there anyone else here besides me who have someone that you care about is either attempted suicide or been at risk of suicide? Right, yeah.
Right here.
Yeah, it can really touch all of our lives, and this can be a little bit activating for us too. So if there's strong emotions around it, you know, we have anxiety about things that we care about. So as Marcia said, a lot of time in law enforcement, a lot of people that have served within the military and served within law enforcement, they're not around anymore. Alcohol, suicide, more of a killer than any line of duty deaths from my experience. So definitely a problem. All right, so I'm going to move through these slides. I should get through. I got 15 slides in 30 minutes. We can do the math. I'll try to have some time at the end for questions, but I'll also hang around at the end if anyone wants to talk to me one-on-one. So, all right. First off, a little bit note. Oh, what's going on here? Let me see here. Hey, Mark. I have a lot of strengths, but technology is not one of them here. Is this normal to have this on the side? Is that
We're trying to
okay?
get rid of it.
Oh, gotcha.
So, no, we don't.
I thought maybe I pressed the wrong button.
Yeah.
Which I've been known to do. Don't push it.
No, what you do, no, don't hit that. Okay, what I want to do,
Or is it minimize it?
it's, okay,
that's the
so,
job.
let's try this again. I
What
had
is-
shared, well, I don't want this. So what I wanted was this, no? Okay. Let's see, we need to get the Zoom out of the way.
Oh, for the sidebar, you just,
Oh, we want to get rid of the Zoom.
yeah,
If you press the green there, will it kind of ride over it? Oh,
No. it's-
well, we can leave it on. That's okay.
It's.
There we go. That's
we-
good enough.
We'd like to.
Oh, look at that magic. The magic of technology. Oh, God.
Okay, all right.
I learned
So now
something
we'll-
new every day. It's like with school, right? When you learn something new, one thing, then you can go home. So I'm just gonna go home. Perfect.
Yeah, that's where.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right. So let me see. First off, a quick note from our legal and ethics departments. Not fictitious, but presentations intended for some general information and considerations related to self-care. Everyone's situation is different. It's a very big topic. So these are general considerations, not offered as or intended to be any form of psychotherapeutic treatment. All right. I'll get into a little bit of some aspects of therapy, which might be helpful because therapy can be helpful for all of us. But and also you are encouraged to seek out professional help if your circumstances so indicate. It can be very helpful. All right, so the quick overview, why it's helpful to help ourselves, how to help others, and how to help ourselves overall. All right, so caregiving. When we think of having a family member that's at risk of suicide, generally could be mental health, could be substance use disorder, could be one other thing is going on too. I like to view that as we're a caregiver because we care about somebody, right? Us as caregivers, we can have higher levels of depression, high levels of stress and frustration. There are sex differences. Women are 2/3 of all unpaid caregivers. So you're more of a population at risk, obviously. No surprise that there's an increased likelihood of using substances and engaging in other harmful behaviors, negative coping strategies, right? Reduced overall physical health, increased risk for chronic conditions to include heart disease, cancer, and arthritis, because we're not caring for ourselves. We're worried about this other person. Plus, stress can really cause a lot of harm to our body, that whole mind-body connection. Therefore, tend to have lower levels of self-care because we're caring for other people. So some things we can do. First off, supporting a loved one or friend with a mental health condition. First off, try to learn what you can about their condition and its treatment. If it's a mental health disorder, a lot of great resources on with the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual to find out what that criteria is. It's helpful to accept that the condition is influencing their behavior. I like this act, accept model, right? If we can act, if we can do something, let's try to do that. But there's many times where no matter how much we care, there's not much we can do. So we have to be willing to accept the situation. Try to show an interest in their treatment plan. Encourage them to follow their treatment plan. And express your support out loud. You know, we can never go wrong demonstrating love and affection for our kids, right? Can it be difficult sometimes, having raised two? Absolutely. But expressing that love and support, 3 ways we can do that. Verbal, physical, just an arm around the shoulder, written, a text, hey, love you, care about you, thinking about you, right? Remember, though, support is not control, right? We can support somebody. It's a very difficult concept, this whole concept of self-determination, right? We can only influence others so much. People are going to do what they want to do. We can do our best to try to guide them and to try to influence them, right? Trying to strive for an atmosphere of cooperation. Hey, what can we do about this? Let's. The most provocative word in the English language, you need to, you always, you never. What can we, maybe more of an asocial statement. Let's work on this together. What can we do about this, right? So we're not feeling that person is feeling it's all on them. Trying to listen carefully, right? I've heard that there's 2 forms of communication, right? Talking and waiting to interrupt if we're not careful. So we want to do our best to try to listen. When I teach Parent Project, we'll encourage parents. I'm seeing this. I'm very concerned. And then a great little saying is, I always try not to miss a good opportunity to shut up. Now, I don't know if my wife would agree with that, but I at least strive for that. But try to listen, because you never know in that silence what they might disclose to you. And try not to push too hard, right? Viktor Frankl said that which we resist persists, right? If we're trying to push our will too much on somebody, they may, even though it may be absolutely the best thing, that's going to create some resistance. So, some more continue. Oh, by the way, this information is on NAMICalifornia.org, so I don't just pull this stuff out of the air. So some things to keep in mind, right? Supporting a loved one or a friend with mental health condition. take steps that you need to do to keep yourself safe, to keep yourself and them safe, right? If they're violent towards themselves, coming up with a safety plan, but also making sure for yourself too, right? Not putting yourself in a position of compromise, being aware of your own personal safety, always knowing if a person does have a potential to get angry, how can I leave, right? Be right back. The first rule of de-escalation, give that person time and distance whenever possible. Be prepared for that crisis. Have those resources in hand. Don't give up. Trying to have a positive attitude. Trying to find something positive in this whole situation. The world may seem like it's falling apart, but maybe try to find what can we make 5% better, 10% better from this situation. And of course, taking care of yourself. If you're at your wit's end, if you're stressed, we're not going to be able to help others unless we have enough mental and physical energy to help ourselves. All right, so actions that can help us, the basic sleep, diet, and exercise. Sleep is so important. Sleepeducation.org, a lot of really good sleep sciences out there, calming the overactive brain. For example, you may have a lot of worry in your life. One trick is try to keep your sleeping area, do what you can to keep those things out of that area. If you have to write down your worries, that's okay. Write them out and then maybe put them someplace that's outside of your area of rest because you need to get some rest too. Diet, very important, myself included, although those sandwiches and chips, I tell you, I was doing good till I came lunch today. Exercise too, right? 20 to 30 minutes, even just getting out for a walk can be very helpful, not only for yourself, but for that loved one. Maybe, there's something, you don't always have to talk about the problem. Any rugby fans in here? Rugby? Yeah, those of us that really have, need to get more of a life watching rugby. When someone's got that rugby ball and is running down the field, their teammate will come up next and say, with you. Grief is like that. People can say a lot of things in grief that they think is helpful and it's not, but just physically being there with someone, even if you don't know what to say, that's okay. Just showing up, just going out for that walk, taking a walk in silence, getting our mind off of things, right? All right, other actions that can help you, making connections. It's easy to isolate. There's also a lot of shame with that too, right? It's not like we go around standing on the street corner and telling people about our family problems, but trying to have connections. Support NAMI Tri-Valley. FERC, does anyone not know who FERC is? Family Education Resource Center. Very good resource to educate yourself about your loved one's mental health condition, but to have resources for yourself. Self-compassion, very important, right? We can be hard on ourselves. Actually, those of us that are well-adjusted, if we get called into the boss's office, anyone ever had that happen? Come in here and I'm going to close the door. The narcissist thinks they're getting promoted. Those of us that are well-adjusted think, we start to take a quick life inventory. What have I done for the past that I could get in trouble, right? We can tend to be our own hardest critics, right? I love, maybe it was Thomas Edison that said, experience is the name that we give to our mistakes. Cicero said that everyone is prone to make mistakes, but it's the idiot that willingly continues to do the same thing over and over, right? But we're all prone to make mistakes. It's all part of our human condition. We come into the parenting, into the romantic relationship with what we have and what we don't have. We have to keep in mind the things we're doing right as well. We all have a lot of strengths. And just by all of you being here today is a huge step. This room should have a lot more folks really would benefit from being here. But the fact that you're here on a Saturday really speaks well, trying to figure out what more we can do. See your doctor, right? I would like to think that psychotherapy is going to cure everything, but ruling out medical conditions is extremely important. Anxiety, depression, those things can be caused by hyperthyroidism, hypothyroidism, anemia. Knowing your family history, knowing the other person's history can be helpful. Rule out those medical conditions because that can really be contributing to what's going on. Respite care, right? Trying to find a way to take a break, very difficult with technology, right? my wife and I were having lunch one day, we're looking out the window and mom and dad and their elementary school kid and mom and dad are just on their phone the whole time. Now with my in-laws, I might do, oh, this is being recorded. Oh, well, they won't. With my in-laws, maybe I'll do that on purpose as a form of avoidance, right? But those that we care about, we want to create that time for connection. It's important. Again, knowing your resources, NAMI, Tri-Valley, NAMI, California, yes, good, very good. Lot of county agencies out there. Remember, an aspect of trauma resiliency, right, is we try to seek more ways for safety, control, predictability. And we have to be careful. There's no absolute guarantees, right? But when we're dealing with something traumatic, we try to find ways, how can I feel a little bit more safe, a little bit more in control, a little bit more predictability? That's where some of these things can really come in handy, things that you can do for yourself, having a plan for yourself. Knowing if I do have to call 911, what can I tell the people that are coming? How do we prepare ourselves to deal with this instead of being hit with it and flat-footed? Let's take a minute or two. Any other ideas that have been helpful with this wonderful group here? Other actions that have been helpful for you in coping? Yes.
I think one of the things I do is community service.
Is what?
Community service, helping other people.
It is hugely important, right? Actually, when someone is dealing with depression, one of the things we prescribe is behavioral activation, a fancy word for saying get out there and do things, getting out of ourselves. Yeah, we're not ignoring what's going on for ourselves, but sometimes being of service to others can be very, very helpful. Alcoholics Anonymous, that's actually one of the tenets, be in service to others, helping others through this journey too. So one more quick idea from anyone? You may think I have all the answers, but Marcia will tell you it's definitely not the case. A lot of experience in this room, right? Again, these are just generalities. You folks are living this, right? I'm not telling you anything that you may not already know, but just here to reinforce it for you a bit. All right, so okay, but if you were my therapist, what would you say? I love what Carl Jung says. We cannot change anything until we accept it. Condemnation does not liberate, it oppresses. We have to be willing to accept. We cannot agree with it, right? Little axiom from couples therapy. If you get nothing else out of this presentation, we can accept how someone sees something and we accept influence from each other. We can accept how someone sees the world. We don't have to agree with it. That's where we get in trouble. Feeling like you need to see things my way. We need to accept what that person's going through. When we accept it, that can help to remove that resistance, right? We accept there's a problem. We're not going to condemn it. It's part of the human condition. Now, what can we do about this? All right, so therapy can be very helpful, right? A little bit of a anxiety, fight or flight. Actually, there's fight or flight or freeze. There's also submit, right? Sometimes we don't have any power. We feel we have to submit. That part of our brain, it can activate about 3 times faster than the rational part of our brain, the thinking part of our brain. That's why if we're experiencing it, but scale of 1 to 10, where do you think your anxiety starts to kick in? 1, I'm doing great. 10, I'm out of my mind. What number do you think a rational thought starts to shut down for us? Maybe I'm the only one that this happens to. Actually, on the opposite end, 6 to 7. 6 to 7 out of 10, we start to lose rational thought. So it doesn't do any good. If you're really stressed, just have happy thoughts. We need to do things to bring ourselves down first. A couple of things that can be helpful, right? A breathing, a 4-count breathing, a simple grounding technique, right? Marcia, maybe I'll use you here real quick, volunteer. I want you to think of something very stressful, like, oh God, Brian's coming to speak today. Oh my gosh. What's he got? Not much with Brian or me. Okay, you have something that you're thinking about? All right, what's 100 minus 7?
To think about it?
Yeah.
It's 10 plus.
Yeah, but what's 100 minus 7? Can you do a quick math problem?
What's 100 minus 7 is 93.
What's 93 minus 7?
86.
Oh, he's too good with them. What's your favorite Pixar movie?
Favorite Pixar movie?
Pixar movie. Yeah, you like Pixar movie? let me stop you there. Are you thinking about what it was that stressed you? Or is your mind busy?
Not
then?
at all.
Not at all, right?
No, wait a minute, I
Yeah.
am a little bit stressed as I'm thinking, what did Pixar do?
Yeah.
Okay.
Plus you have all these
But
people
it's-
here too. Why is Brian
it's
asking me
like,
this
okay,
question?
Now I gotta go research this. so-
Yeah, I love Pixar, Bugs Bunny movies. I was raised on Looney Tunes. Maybe that's why. Right. So anxiety and curiosity cannot coexist. Post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety-based disorder, we have anxiety about things that are important to us. So if their anxiety is starting to shut down their rational thought, try to do something to get them thinking. We want to stimulate rational thought, get that anxiety down to from a 6 to a 7. And we do that by 4-count breathing, some sort of grounding technique. Progressive muscle relaxation can be helpful, right? There's a lot of great resources out there, personal grounding techniques. Once that happens, then we can start to think of, okay, what's going on? I'm thinking the worst. Okay, what might be the worst, best likely? I have this negative belief. I think I'm the worst person in the world. I never do anything right. And then we can maybe look at that. Well, let's see, you're doing a lot of things right. The problem's not always a problem. But if our prefrontal cortex isn't working, trying to do that with someone doesn't help. We need to find a way to give them some relaxation, some coping skills, get them down below that anxiety so we can get some rational thought going and then start to think our way through the problem together. So social support, very, very, very important, right? Believe it or not, I'm not allowed to do therapy with family members. Why do you think that is?
Or with your own family members?
Yeah. Because I'm a fantastic therapist, right? They just, no.
Bias.
Yeah. They actually know me. They're really. So sometimes we might be a little bit too close to a problem. As a parent, I would love to be everything to my kids, but it's probably well that I'm not, because my wife's much better doing things. They have other people in their lives too. Having other people in their lives that can be so supportive. There's this desire to have us be able to fix everything, but sometimes we need a good deal of people in our lives to get those different perspectives on ourselves. And then also seeking out professional help if we're experiencing marked distress. I heard a statistic, 40% of us in our lifetime will have a mental health disorder. Well, just in thinking about, there's this little thing called an adjustment disorder, clinically marked distress causing anxiety or depression or mix based upon something that's happened in my life within the past 6 months or currently ongoing. Well, heck, death of a loved one, loss of a job, divorce, terminal illness. All of us are going to be prone to having something happen to us, a difficult time adjustment. Except for the guy, did you see Free Solo, the guy that free climbed Half Dome? Did you see that guy? No fears. Someone must have removed his amygdala, right? He's like just, I don't know. I would like stand on this desk and get dizzy. I do not like heights, but he's climbing, no fear at all. Very rare exception, right? All of us have things that we have a difficult time adjusting with. So getting some help for ourselves. Therapy doesn't have to be long-term. There's solution-focused therapy, 6 to 8 sessions. Hey, got this thing going on. What might be some good coping skills for me? My axiom for therapy: if it's helping, do more of it. If it's not, try something different. When I remember that, boy, my life goes better too. So, and about that shame and guilt that we can all have when something beyond our control happens. First off, acceptance can be very helpful. Self-compassion. Boundaries are very helpful too. We're responsible to others, but try not to feel responsible for. If I go home and my spouse is not in the best mood, if my conscience is clear right now, maybe I did a lot of things wrong, it's been known to happen, but I want to be careful to not let the way that they're feeling to try to chase after them and come on, let's fix this. She may not want to talk about the problem. And in that case, hey, I'm here to talk to you. If you would like to, just let me know. We're responsible too, but we have to watch out when we're feeling responsible for other people's well-being, right? Think about, what would a trusted friend tell you? A third person perspective can be helpful because, as I said before, we all tend to be our own worst critics. What would a trusted third? I find when I'm working with a client in a therapy and they really have these negative beliefs, a lot of shame, guilt, what they did, I said, well, if you were talking to your best friend, would you tell that to us? Say, no, I wouldn't feel that way. Well, then let's kind of work on not being so hard on ourselves too. Any other thoughts about shame and guilt? What's been helpful for folks dealing with it? Besides all these self-care
I
things.
think like giving it a name, like being like, oh, there's Billy, like, or I don't know,
Yeah.
or something.
Right.
Because that helps me, because I don't, like, if I get the acceptance part, but then it's like, I have to be like,
Yeah, here comes critical Carl, right?
Yeah.
William Churchill suffered from depression. He called it his black dog coming to visit.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe help.
I don't know why I said Billy.
At least you didn't say Brian. Bum Brian. Oh, a little Freudian slip going on. I love this saying on the bottom. If we're having to go into a situation, I know the holidays just passed, the next holidays come up, and some people are just going to try to drag you in. Try not to get on the ride. Right? Try not to get on the ride with that. And if you need to remove yourself from the situations, you can take care of yourself. Keep that anxiety down below a 6 or a 7, so we're not getting too distressed ourselves. I'm going to close with this, the story of Joshua Speed, story about how one person can make a difference in someone's life. Joshua Speed became a friend of a man who had been born 5 years earlier. This man was 2 or 3 years old when his baby brother Thomas died. At age 9, his mother, great aunt, and uncle all died within the same 2-week period of time of milk sickness. After his mother's death, the man was raised by his older sister, Sarah. When the man was 19, Sarah died. Then at age 26, one of his best friends died as well. Years later, that man experienced 6 months of severe depression, not a surprise. His friends were so concerned that they, quote, removed all razors, knives, pistols, etc. from his room and presence, unquote, because they feared he might attempt suicide. The man described himself as the most miserable man living. To remain as I am is impossible. I must die or get better. His friend, Joshua Speed, stayed with him constantly during this time. It was only after 6 months, when Speed needed to attend his own father's funeral, which involved several days of travel, that the man said he felt okay enough for Speed to go to the funeral alone. You notice it didn't say he counseled him, told him all these words. He just stayed with him. Well, most of us may not know who Joshua Speed was. The person whose life he helped to save is someone we all know very well. His friendship with our 16th president, Abraham Lincoln, seems to have helped save Lincoln's life. Lincoln faced many more struggles in his life, including the death of one of his sons and the Civil War, but there was no indication that he ever suffered from that degree of depression again or was ever again suicidal. The story is presented here to help remind all of us that one person can make a difference, and that a person that is helped by our care and concern may very well go on to help others or even do something important to help others themselves, which is why we're all here, myself included. So, that's from the Institute for Health and Recovery 2020, if you'd like to get that. Any Princess Bride fans, can you name this? Any Princess Bride fan, can you name this person? Hello, my name is Inigo Montoya. Let me explain. There is too much. Let me sum up. Sorry, I had to kind of rush through this, but I definitely want to make sure I got through everything. The PowerPoints will be available through the recording, right? Will that be the case, or?
And we would like to post them if we may. Okay.
Give me one more of those sandwiches to take home, and that is my price. Absolutely, yeah. No, absolutely. There's some really good resources on there. We might have a minute or two for any quick questions. I don't want to get into the evaluation times.
You're doing great.
Oh, great, good, perfect. Any questions or?
Yes. And I don't. What made you switch from law enforcement to being a psychologist?
Yeah, 30 years of being a cop was enough. Yeah, I worked juvenile, child abuse, worked just doing that for 30 years. Some folks will retire. Like for me, 30 years was the retirement mark, and some will retire from a city and go to work for a county. I was 18 years old. I graduated from amateur class of 84. You find the yearbook, you'll see I had a mullet. I was not on the college track. I was in that half of the class and made the top half possible. So I joined the Army, 3 years active duty. That was where I had my first experience with some of the bad sides of life, right? I was in the military police corps because I wanted to get into law enforcement, but was 18 and you couldn't be a police officer on the outside at 21. So I joined the Army, did my 3 years there, about a year, and realized I didn't want to do that for 30 years, and law enforcement became my goal. And then through my career in law enforcement, not only having my own job stress to deal with, but I worked a lot with juveniles, families in crisis, and really came to believe that there absolutely have to be consequences, but there's a lot that can be done on the front end too, right? If we can maybe work, a lot of folks that are in situations that can't be helped, if we can maybe get them some intervention. So about 5 years before I retired, realizing I didn't want to get into law enforcement anymore, but I didn't want to just sit around the whole time. I'm going to need something to do, and was always interested in psychology, psychotherapy. So got my master's in marriage family therapy, and then got my hours, started my hours through Horizons Family Counseling here in town. I was at Dublin High School, 2016. I had 2 kids in high school. Man, what a wake up call. Holy cow, things are different now. And then I worked for a variety of places. In law enforcement, towards the end of my career, I worked with a multidisciplinary forensic team, because dealing with the seriously mentally ill and seeing some of these unfortunate use of forces that would happen. Some are unavoidable, but is there some way that we can get these folks into services that the police are continuing to contact? The MDFT with Alameda County was just wonderful. Stephanie Lewis works with crisis services. She was a real good contact. So that was how I found my second calling. And I've been licensed since 2021 and have my own practice in town. Work a lot with first responders and couples, right? Trying to keep those relationships going. My approach to trauma is that it tends to be experienced alone, so we can keep those relationships in our lives going. It can be very helpful. Yeah.
I think you were one of the charter members.
Thank you. Yeah, I am. Yeah. It's called the multidisciplinary forensic team. So it was started by Oakland Police Department, County Behavioral Health, and the BART, right? Yeah, BART, and then Oakland jumped in, because these people, we kept dealing with these consumers of mental health services, and granted, there might be some where the police have to get involved, but was it Mark Twain that said, if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail, right? So trying to get the behavioral health folks in, communicating more. So we would meet once a month, talk about some people we were dealing with, and they would reach out and get services. It's a very, very effective program. So
Alameda County and NAMI Tri-Valley were participants before COVID hit.
Yes, yeah.
Quite back to that.
Yeah.
We were on the charter.
Right. Yeah. All those years ago, meeting in Oakland at the BART headquarters there. Yeah. Yes.
I'm curious about MBFT.
Right.
So you said it's a very effective program. Are there data out there on changes? Is that focused on the police, or is that CIT?
It's actually all intertwined. It's getting folks together from behavioral health, veteran services, police departments, because so often people see someone seriously mentally ill and the police are called, but there's so much else that needs to happen. So yeah.
About like the CIT programs, and obviously this. If there are any data there on changes in police behavior in terms of de-escalating.
I'll tell you this, I still teach pro bono CIT. One Thursday a month for an adventure, I go from my practice in Pleasanton to Oakland PD, and I help to instruct on de-escalation. I first started doing that in 2017. Back around 2010, CIT first started coming into the forefront. And a lot of the case law that you see that police departments are doing now, dealing with the mentally ill, happened from these cases about 2006 to 2010. And there's probably conflicting data out there, but I will tell you that the police officers nowadays, crisis intervention, talking to folks, it's much more ingrained with this generation of officers now. It's really hard to see. What worries me is things are going okay, we take our eyes off the ball, where we have to constantly stoke the fire, keeping people trained. But every month a CIT class over to Oakland PD is full. There are some agencies from outside the county sending their staff. It used to be every agency, like Pleasanton, where I retired as lieutenants from. the goal was to get every officer trained in CIT and our dispatchers and our civilian personnel. I'm not sure if that's still going on. COVID really threw some things around. Budget problems, staffing can be problematic, but I'm a huge believer in CIT. It's, yeah.
Was in Baltimore before I came here.
Yeah.
And, was part of the CIT training as a NAMI member.
Yeah.
When I started with that, they were just training the new trainees.
Yeah.
So they would go through training, all of them and then the seasoned officers were not trained in it.
That's
So
where the
the
gap
newer
was, right.
rookies are going in and then with some ideas, and then the senior officers.
They're up here, this ain't how it happened. Right, yeah,
Exactly.
and,
So then
yeah,
Fred-
yeah.
when Freddie Gray happened in Baltimore, and they were
Yeah.
mandated, all
Right.
of the police officers were mandated to take
Yeah.
CIT. And I've always wondered whether that really made an impact on the way the officers behave, or whether you really have to wait for the next generation to come on.
No, I think it's a combination of both, because I was that older generation, but I really believed in the tenets of CIT. But also now, departments have written policies on it now. You will use crisis de-escalation. It's actually taught in the academy now. It's really gotten into the DNA. But there's a lot of right now what's happening with CIT is myself and then a clinician from Mobile Crisis instruct. So we're actually starting to now not just how you do CIT, but now how do you start to work with some of these crisis intervention teams that are coming out? So places like Portland have been doing that well. Portland, Seattle, Bay Area, I'm doing good. I think they're trying to bring it out here to the Tri-Valley. It can be kind of difficult if you don't have that call for service load, but it's definitely after the past 15 years that I've been involved, it's definitely woven its way in much better. So yeah.
I think it's went backwards a little bit. This Brown versus whatever. Police officers are very reluctant to go into 911 calls.
Yeah.
Because of they're afraid of liability.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because really, folks are very unpredictable. Like, I'll close with this. Folks would ask me, "Hey, what have you learned about people after 33 years?" And I'll tell them, "No, we just never know about people. We never know what's going on behind those eyes." Right. All we can do is try to deal with things a little bit better than what we've done before. But it definitely it's woven in much better to the DNA. So knock on wood. I think I'm out of time. You don't have your shepherd's crook there to hook me off the vaudeville stage. Yeah. Thank you, everybody. So
That's just for you. Thank you.
Archie, you are so welcome. If you were happy with the presentation, my name is Brian Laurence. If you're not happy with it, my name is John Smith.
It's still.
I know Marcia knows how to get a hold of me. I can never get away, and that is a good thing. Thank you so much for all that you've done throughout the years. We're actually starting to go back a little ways. I really appreciate it.
Fine.
So, yeah.
So, and it's wonderful to see, your transition. as
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
It's exciting. So,
Yeah. You asked, it's been good for me too. Right? I actually got some of my hours working in behavioral health at Santa Rita Jail, and just as doing the law enforcement job, it's good to broaden my horizon. Right? Not that what is happening on a grander scale shouldn't be happening, but we can all benefit from a broadening of our perspective, and it's never too late to get another career.
we're going to ask you back.
Please do, as long as you keep having the sandwiches. I'll keep.
Oh, we'll be always.
Yes. Sure.
It's about SMI, okay? You have your own practice.
About what?
You have your own practice, and I want to ask about SMI specifically.
Okay.
Like, my son is a 30-year-old.
Okay.
He despises cops because all his experience has been 25 times hospitalized since he was 19, right? And he doesn't believe in a system. She goes, "Mom, you're turning me into the system." Who can talk to him? I mean, he cannot talk, he will not open up to the parents. Everything we say is wrong with the parents. I still am looking for that one person that is gonna change or have him be the mirror. I know it's gotta come from within.
Yeah, is he willing to talk to someone? Is he willing to help? Is he stable to, to be able to come to therapy versus being actively suicidal or homicidal? But if he's pretty stable, if he's willing to help, you can have him call me for a 15-minute consult if you want.
I will try. It's just that I don't know if he believes in any therapy or anything.
Right,
It
yeah.
is,
He might
it's
not,
very
yeah.
hard to say how stable or when are they stable, because
Yeah.
I talk to him, he seems pretty cool, and then I don't know when it goes off, what he's got going in his head. I don't know even the time what's in his head.
Yeah. Hopefully he's getting care from someone, or is he not getting?
Allegheny County, I'm very sorry to say, has no facilities and all that.
Yeah.
They've been putting him in a housing that's not the proper, there is no housing, there is no,
Yeah, I would love
It's a
to
big
see,
problem.
continue that, but I'd like to wrap up it's very complex, very complex.
Yes, it is,
Yes.
yes. But you have my phone number if you'd like to
Yeah.
talk a little more.
And we'll
Yeah.
post the PowerPoints online.
thank you.
Okay, so this concludes the suicide prevention workshop for parents of adolescents and children. And if you just take a minute to fill out the evaluation, it's 4 little questions and the same, please, on Zoom. And we will be forever grateful. This will help us in trying to get more funding to put on more workshops. So thank you so much. Our next workshop is August 19th here, or unless we can get unless we can get a grant to get a larger space. So thank you all and take care. And I hope this was helpful.